All right, welcome to the Milton Planning Board. This is our 17th meeting of the fiscal year. And the first thing we're going to do is introduce ourselves. I'm Alex Whiteside, the chairman.
Ed Duffy, I wish happy spring to everybody. I think it's here.
Finally.
Mike Kelly, member.
Brian Furs, member.
Emily Martin, admin.
Tim Serwinski, Assistant Town Planner.
Emily Ennis, member.
And we have over in the corner Bill Clark, the town planner. Now, we're going to remember our colleague Bill Dolan, who recently died. Bill was on the board for 33 years. He was really the dean of the board. No one has served on the planning board longer than Bill, and he served with great distinction. And he did a lot to get the town to where it is now. The zoning, which is in place, a lot of it was the brainchild of Bill Dolan. It was especially good in things that trying to avoid streets while allowing for development. He was quite brilliant. So we should observe a moment of silence for Bill Dolan. Thanks. We're going to meet tomorrow, 6:30, same place, I believe, right?
Downstairs.
No, we're going to be downstairs in the Blute Conference Room. And then we'll meet again on April 9th. Citizen speak? Any citizens want to speak on a matter that it is not going to be on the... we're having a public hearing on some zoning, and people wanting to speak on that can speak on that in due course. Citizens who don't want to speak about the zoning in Thayer are encouraged to come and speak briefly. But seeing none, we will pass to a plan for 711 Randolph Avenue. And this, I believe, is the site of a proposed 40B development. And who is going to tell us about this plan?
Yeah, Jim DeSalle from DeSalle Burke and Associates. I guess the big question here is whether it's Zone B or Zone C. I mean, I'm sorry, Zone A or Zone C. That seems to be the issue from the beginning. The zoning map that's online, hanging on the wall in the planning office, or was at the time, and the one we've been using as far back as I can, and I know it was published in 2002, clearly shows that this lot is in a Zone C.
Which lot?
The
Lot A
711.
or Lot B?
Lot A is in the Zone C. Lot
Okay.
B is in Zone A.
Okay.
That's not
And
the,
parcel A is also a lot, and that is in the A district.
part of it.
Well, we are going to have to, so there's another issue there.
Again, it's the same idea. It's going back to 100 feet. The original lot subdivision back in 1950 included 721, 711, all the way down to 699. It included all of these lots here.
669.
669, I'm sorry.
Okay,
And the Zone C was 100 feet back from there.
100 feet back from the street or from
The
the?
street line.
Okay. And?
So, and it, which ran roughly where that sewer easement is. So the line shot, all, you know, on the zoning map, it shows it going all the way down to the property that's owned by, it says Jacob and Christian Carlin.
So was Lot A and Lot B initially one lot?
Yes, it is
Okay.
right now.
So that is an indication that someone way back when, thought it was in the A zone, right?
Maybe, yeah.
That's,
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, it's a larger lot. It's a 40,000 square foot lot.
and it has, but it doesn't have enough frontage for an A lot. So that is an indication that someone may have either been wrong or sloppy.
Or it was a C lot which only required 75 feet of frontage.
Well, exactly. And so why do you want to make B into a unbuildable lot?
We're going to add it to parcel A as part of that 40B project.
Why don't you reflect that on this plan? To be combined. Lot B will be combined. That's what's usually done with parcel A, which is in fact a lot.
It says right here in note 4, that's what we're doing.
What?
If you look at note 4, that says exactly what we're doing.
Oh, okay. Parcel A is a lot,
Correct.
so it should be denominated a lot.
It's not, okay, but it's not part of quote-unquote this division. The only lot being divided,
Well, it is because it's going to be added to.
okay.
I mean, and you have these owners, you have the three owners, and we don't know what they own. Do you know what they own?
Yes.
Well, maybe you could. And it also seems to me you should take out the wetlands, since we're not going to.
Okay.
And what about all these other dotted lines that you have here? You show Meg Lane, Meg Lane. You show Meg Lane.
I indicate the subdivision plan that created Meg Lane that was never acted on.
Right. Any particular reason? Just general information?
It just indicates where it is.
Okay, now Mr. Clark has a few choice words.
Okay.
It does, and it's going to push Mr. DeSello over a little bit. What we have is a series of design plans that go back to 1938, 1994, 2002. And what Jim is talking about is, he's right. Somehow or another, in 2002, our engineering department decided to take and put Meg Lane, or Ashley, I think it's Ashley on here, onto the plan. But in 2002, this isn't the plan that town meeting approved. Town meeting last amended the zoning plan in 1995. So I've been looking for 1995 plans, and we don't have it. The closest thing I came up with was a 1994 plan. But if you take the 1994 plan, you take our parcel data from today, and you use the 1938 plan, these things match up. And in the 1938 plan, they didn't have...
What things match up?
The zoning lines.
Okay. And the zoning lines are different, you're saying,
In
from what's on
2002,
the
somehow or
current
other,
map?
In 2002, the zoning line slid down the street so that it included 711, 721.
In which zone? It included it in C or included it in A?
Those were in A.
Those were in A until the 2002
Plan.
map.
They're
Okay.
in Zone A.
Okay.
How did they ever get approved without enough frontage?
They did have frontage. Meg Lane wasn't there.
Oh, so they took
Oh,
the frontage
they
from
had-
it,
yeah,
from,
All I
okay.
can think is that that's what happened. I can't find any filing on Meg Lane because it was too long ago.
what about the registry?
I have the Meg Lane subdivision plan, if you want that, from 1997.
Yeah, okay.
So there was no road there before 1997.
And who owned it?
It was owned by the O'Toole estate.
And who owned number 711 at that time?
James Harder.
He had
Wow.
130 feet of frontage.
Yep.
Which is what it shows here.
So was that 94 Meg Lane taken from 711 or 693?
I don't know.
It was never part of it at this time. This was sold out in the 50s.
Right, but you're showing a hard line along Lot A and a hard line along 693 here. Where's the division between Lot A and 693, or is that all Lot A? See what I mean? There's no border here.
Okay, but again, I can show you the plan, that was in 1950. It was a dotted line that was indicated saying that they were going to potentially put a road there in the future.
Okay, but now, where's the legal line between those two
Along the
properties
edge
now?
of, there's a 50-foot strip between 7-Eleven and 693, which was the remainder of the O'Toole piece.
Is that curve about 20 feet? I mean, if it came in straight, would that be 20 feet?
Yes,
Okay, so,
but again, it's not a road.
But who owns it?
It was owned by the O'Toole,
Who
No,
owns it now?
the HMDW.
Okay. So it's not owned by the people on either side, it's owned by the people who
People in the back.
own parcel A? Okay.
Yeah, this,
so,
I don't find any recording for 7-Eleven in the zoning board of appeals, so I don't know how
okay,
they
I
got to
want,
130.
it seems to me the way we should do this is the members of the board should go look at the plans. And we should do this on April 9th. What do you think of that, Bill?
I'm fine with that.
All right.
Looking at
What
you
does the
for-
board think of that?
What plans are we looking at?
What?
These plans.
All that
These,
stuff.
These, those, this.
Okay? So we're going to, and we don't have a time constraint, do we?
No, well, you do, but if it's going to be contested, you
What?
potentially do because it's an A and R. They
But has
filed
it
as
been
an
filed with
A&R.
the town clerk?
It was filed with the town.
When?
I want to say November.
The date on this is November 5th on this actual
Yeah, but that
drawing.
came before
So it would have
the
been-
application.
Of course.
But it
but-
still comes back that it's something that is contesting the zoning plans that we have.
Well, since we're over the, over the limit, being a little more over the limit probably is not the worst thing in the world. Let's look at these things and see if we can't figure it out. It really should, you should get your parcels all denominated as lots and make a little, it would be nice to have a little squiggle there, but I guess that you can't do the squiggle until it's happened, can you?
No, it
But
doesn't.
it is owned by the same people. So you could do a squiggle because as soon as
Indirectly.
we approve it, then
they're different entities, but
you could
same
do it.
parties.
You could do a squiggle.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Parcel A and Lot B is owned by the same entity, you said?
Not the same entity, but
The same group.
same groups.
Okay. Which
They
are-
controlled.
And they have nothing to do with Lot A?
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
They do?
They own
They
this,
own it.
this, and this.
Presently, Lot A and Lot B are one lot.
Okay.
So just,
Plan here is to divide those two.
before we stop, I had one
It's to
question.
take Lot B and connect it up with parcel A for the 40B
For the
project.
development.
But if we do that as is currently drawn here, and Lot A is actually in Residence A, it means we're making Lot A non-conforming, correct?
Yes.
That's the problem. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that second half of it.
And we would think it was grandfathered. Okay. So we're going to do this on April 9th. Now, thanks for coming in.
These stick out.
Anyway, so.
Are those things all for?
Ms. Patrick, would you come and be
Will they copies?
succinct and brief about Schulman Way?
I'm Marion McKettrick. I'm an attorney for Congregation Beth Shalom, and I just came tonight with a question about how to file an application for what we think is a minor modification of their subdivision plan. So I just want to pass this around. It's small, the rest of I have one large plan to show you what's proposed. I've given you a memo. I'm going to give you another copy tonight because I think it's even a little bit clearer the way I've written it. The gist of this is there are two small changes that are proposed. One is a tiny change in the perimeter of the lot, because Mr. Gordon, who donated the land to the temple, wants to donate another 1,700 square feet in order to square off an edge so that it will follow the stone wall. So on this plan is this little plan, and I'm sorry I don't have a big one for you tonight, but there's a reason. I want to find out what the label should be. On this little plan, if you go in from Lodge Street, you'll see parcel 29M2. It's a triangular parcel at the end of Schulman Way and just on the edge. That's the parcel that Mr. Gordon wants to convey to the temple. And it changes the lot lines.
Well,
Or it changes something on
it
the
doesn't
subdivision.
change the lot lines, it simply,
It creates a new
it
parcel.
adds to the amount of land in the, available to the temple.
That's correct. So, do you want me to ask for a modification of the definitive plan to do this, or not? But I guess that's my first
I
question.
would think that if they acquire extra land, they don't have to change the subdivision. They can just acquire it and plant it with whatever they want to plant there.
And record it with the registry of
And
deeds,
record
et
it,
cetera, et
exactly.
cetera.
And
Yeah.
we don't have to change the subdivision for that.
Because I'll either have to file a linear description or the survey plan showing what the parcel is. And so originally, I thought it might be more straightforward to just come in and get it approved by you and then have it be the revised or modified subdivision.
We can always make it part of the subdivision if you really, really want us to. But I don't think we really, really want to do it.
Okay, yeah, that's my question. Do you want me, I
all
thought
right.
I might be required to do it that way.
Yeah, I was going to say, the only thing is if you're coming in to us for something else, say the entry drive layout.
And we are.
You could go ahead and include it on there because you're coming in anyway. If that were the only thing, I
Okay.
wouldn't worry about it.
Well, we are coming in for a second request, so you can think about it for a minute while I explain the second request. The second request is one we had discussed last year, and it is a modification of the end of the roadway so that rather than having, this is still within the approved road layout. So the approved road layout on the definitive plan does not change in order to approve this request. Now, these are three plans. I'm going to leave them with you so you can look at them. And the reason I'm here tonight is to just make sure we do our application in proper form. This is a plan you do not have yet, but we will be giving to you, which shows the way this lot is actually going to be developed. Because they now have a plan for the building, they have a plan for the parking lots. Now that they have a parking lot and a driveway going out of the parking lot, they want to eliminate the paved turnaround at the end of the road because they don't need it anymore. And the fire department last year told us that they were fine with this design once we had actually developed it. But in order to submit this subdivision plan last year, when we didn't have plans, we had to provide the turnaround. These are plans, these are sheets of the plan that you have approved. This is the roadway detail plan, which is sheet 4, and this would have to be submitted to you as an amendment. This is an amended, is this the roadway detail? No, this is sheet 4. This is the layout for the road, but this shows the details for the roadway design at the end. See how it's turning now and there's no circle here? That requires that we submit an amended part of our plan. All of this plan, all 5 sheets, have been recorded.
Or we could require that you simply don't build out the circle and continue it straight and leave it on the plan and simply say, don't build out the circle.
Whatever is simpler is the way we'd like to
I
do
think
it.
that is simplest.
This plan is still going to be created for the purposes of the temple because, of course, the engineering department has to approve all kinds of details.
But I
do you
I
need it?
understand, but putting it on record at the Registry of Deeds probably isn't something you want to do. And if we simply, for the time being, because you have the turnaround in the parking lot, not require that the circle be built out, just have a driveway go through it to the parking lot, we could do that without much fuss, I think. What does the board think?
It's within the original roadway that we approved. You're not
Correct.
going to either side of it.
It's not a redesign of the roadway.
So we can treat it as a de minimis, write a memo to the effect that the board
Yeah.
agrees if we all in fact
I
agree.
mean, the circle would still exist, except it would have flowers on it.
It's less pavement.
Right.
more
Right.
vegetation.
Right.
Yeah,
It's been worked out with the neighbors.
that's a key element.
It might, I think we might be moving the fire hydrant a little bit, and I hate to say it, but that was on your plan, it's same deal, it was on this one, but whatever you
That's
wanted me to
between the
do.
engineering and the fire department.
But
Exactly.
don't put it in the circle.
It's not going to be, it's on the edge, but I think it's been moved
Keep
over a
it
little
on the
bit.
edge of the circle, just because the circle will still exist in case something happens to the parking lot.
Okay, okay, I understand that. So if we are able to do this way, I'm not sure exactly how it should be written up for a vote by the planning board, and I want to leave these plans with you anyway so that you can review them once again to make sure there isn't some problem with this. That is another reason why we'll do this parcel conveyance as a conveyance, and we'll tie it, we'll figure out how to do that. I'll either do it with a linear description, or if I have to record something, I'll record something, but as long as you don't object to the conveyance of that parcel, that tiny little piece of land, when you have this subdivision
We
plan.
can't object.
Okay. All right. And,
At
well,
least I don't think we can object.
and I'm assuming also that just conveying a 1,700 square foot parcel, I mean, we're not creating a lot, it's not a buildable lot, it's not an A
It
and
is
R.
being combined,
Right, it is.
so it's just increasing the size of the existing lot,
Okay, so I can, okay.
existing
All right,
conforming
good.
lot.
That's very helpful. If
Thanks
that's-
for coming in.
You're welcome.
All right, now, we have a zoning matter to consider. There is a citizen's petition, which was filed, called Condominium Planned Unit Development. And we are holding a public hearing on it tonight because we're supposed to make a recommendation to town meeting about what we think about it. I might add, and Mr. Clark isn't here, but there also is on the warrant a moratorium having to do with signs.
It's tomorrow.
What?
We're talking about that tomorrow.
We're going, right. But it does seem to me, and you can think about this for tomorrow, that it does seem to me that that is a zoning change. Just because it would change the deal on signs potentially forever. So I think we're probably going to have a hearing on that down the line sometime.
I thought the hearing on that was tomorrow.
That's just
No, it
the-
hasn't been advertised.
Oh, it wasn't advertised? Okay. Yeah, we should have a hearing
So
on
we'll
that.
have a talk about it tomorrow.
Discussion.
And then make sure we have the hearing one of the two nights in April.
Okay, does anyone want to, is there any proponent here on this citizens article for condominium planned unit development who would like to advocate for its passage at town meeting?
Good evening. Tabor Keeley, and I'm one of the original 10 signatories for the, on the article. I'd like to advocate for this for a number of reasons. I was a party, was a neighbor to the St. Pius process from last fall, and during that process, all of the neighbors pretty much agreed that this ought to be a template for a plan for the town instead of a spot zone the way it was for St. Pius. And I thought that this was a good example of something that we could do. Whether the verbiage was perfect, I don't know, but it was progress in my book. I think we're in deep trouble in this town, and we've got to get out in front of that and plan. The development community is planning for us. We've got a lot of 40Bs. They seem to be popping up with some regularity, and I don't see any reason why that will stop. As a town, I think if you watch the selectmen's meeting or the warrant committee, you can tell that we're pretty close to broke, and single-family homes are a money loser. These are, as a multifamily or a condominium development, the town has several of them between 88 Wharf and Quistit Brook, the old Lamb Estate, a lot of other examples. And the number of students at the Milton Public Schools in those developments, dramatically less. And I know that Bill Clark's office has done a little study on that, and I don't have the numbers with me, but it is significant versus the standard single-family home. And at $13,000 a student, we just can't afford it. And this is a number of reasons to go forward with this. I understand that there's an amendment for a site-specific zone coming, and I think that may be appropriate at this time because we need to get something passed here versus the consequences of not allowing it through zoning and pushing it for some other, either a 40B or a nonprofit. But I think this really ought to be the kick in the pants. We need to get this thing done. And if it's not on the fall warrant, I think we're all in really big trouble. Thank you.
Okay, does anyone else want to be heard on this?
Proponents for it, against it? Good evening. My name is Eric Chupchelowitz. I live on Ford Ranch Road. I was going to speak mostly about the amendment to the proposed bylaw.
Can't speak to the amendment until the amendment is presented.
Understood.
It gets a little confusing if we speak to two different articles, or two different proposed bylaws simultaneously, so.
Understood. I will echo then the concerns that were raised during the condo committee discussions about the proposed bylaw. While I do agree that condo zoning is a great addition to the town, in the current form, I don't think it's appropriate. St. Pius was in one zone of the town, but I don't think the way that it lays out the framework for condo development is appropriate town-wide. We have different zones, as do most communities, and density is distributed throughout the town to maintain the single-family zones, there's business districts, and I think that's all an important part of planning. So with that, I will wrap up. Again, there was a big discussion on that. I know Alex and Brian were on the condo committee, so more of those issues were discussed. But I will reserve my comments on the site-specific amendment for the appropriate time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Who else wants to be heard on this? Yes, Ms. McKettrick?
May I speak about an amendment now, or would you like to wait?
You can speak about the amendment if you care to. Does anyone else, are there any other proponents of this particular article who want to be heard on it? Okay, I don't see any. Why don't you come up and
Thank
So
you.
there seems to, I'm just watching the audience. Do you have something you want to say?
Well, I'm confused, but I'm sure Alex will explain. So you don't want anybody to speak specifically?
I want anyone to say whatever they want to say about the original article. There is going to be an amendment which I am not going to participate in consideration of because it would affect my property. But I've asked Ms. Innes to to do that. So
I was going to say, I think it may be cleaner if we deal with the article that's on the warrant now first.
okay.
Get that conversation dealt with, and then move on to the amendments, so we don't have a back and forth and a
All right.
confusion about which one we're talking about.
I think it's a good
Okay.
conversation.
Does anyone want to be heard in opposition to this
Original.
article? The article on the warrant was submitted by the citizens. I have a few comments which I can make on this. The article has no minimum lot size. It makes unbuildable lots buildable. Its purpose is to interesting purposes, very vague purposes. Preservation of areas of scenic beauty needs to be defined. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Historic preservation, once again. Protection of environmental features. What does that mean? A neighborhood's unique character and history. It is very, very vague. They say that you can have density of 4 units an acre and get a bonus. A bonus if you have a variety of things, including significant difficulties of access, would give you a bonus of 0.5 units. And for the life of me, I don't know why significant difficulties in access should give you a bonus in the number of units you can build. Sensitive environmental features, once again, there are many environmental features. The bonus language is just as vague as the original language. In number 3, they switch from condominium planned unit development to townhouse development without giving any explanation whatsoever of why. You go to 4 building setbacks, they talk about adequately buffered from neighboring residential properties. Adequate, needs to mean something. The planning board just can't say this doesn't look adequate to us. It needs to say something. There needs to be specificity in this article. I don't think 1.5 parking spaces, this is number 6, 1.5 parking spaces for a unit in an area that isn't served by public transportation is at all sufficient. I think it should be at least 2. I don't think an addition of 2/10 for guest parking and service parking is adequate. And then finally, let's look at the St. Pius. It was 4 units. This is a Residence A zone. 4 units per acre with a 0.5 bonus if you did certain things. If you go to a Residence A zone, which is twice as big as an A zone, presumably you would have half as many units. So in a double A zone, you'd have a density of 20 with, if there were a bonus, which there is for these incomprehensible reasons, you get to 2.25 maximum density. This is an attempt, This was a draft that was sent to the working group on condominium development, and was somehow translated into a warrant article before it had been vetted by the working group. And my suggestion is that it needs to be vetted by the working group, and it would be a good idea to send this along to the planning board with the suggestion that it might be referred to the working group.
You're also on the condominium committee, so I don't know if you have thoughts.
Well,
I've got a few thoughts.
I mean, my original reaction to the bylaw, it actually ends with, I think Mr. Weitz would make lots of good comments, but I think for me, the lack of a minimum lot size was really, that was a deal killer for me right as I read it. As far as whether the condo committee reflects on this particular bylaw that was put forward or continues to do its own work on a variety of combining this with the St. Pius and looking at a few other versions, potentially this amendment that's coming forward, I have no problem with necessarily recommending it back to study for the planning board, but I'm not sure that I want this particular submission to be the basis of our work going forward. So if it is referred back to the planning board for further study, I wouldn't want our study to be limited to this particular submission.
Which I don't think it would be. I mean, it would be just sent to the planning board, and it would, the planning board would say, here's something you can think about.
Okay.
But it would not certainly bind anyone or the working group.
One of the considerations I had when I read this, I share a number of concerns about it, not least of which is the ability for somebody to assemble parcels together to create a development in order to do this. But one of the considerations is this is an article that's in front of town meeting. It's on the warrant. I'm assuming it's going forward under print with a no recommendation at this time, given where we are in the process. So we'll be presenting our recommendation at town meeting. The question would be, as I read through this, are there changes that we can make to this article within the scope of this article that would tighten up the concerns that I'm sure we all have with it? And I went through and had a look at it, and I agree. I think it should be sent back to the planning board for further study. And I don't want to knock the work of the people who wrote this and brought it forward, because I agree. I think looking at this on a town-wide basis is critical. But certainly the vagueness of the language makes it a difficult bylaw for us to enforce later on and to write a special permit for in order to allow something like this to happen. So I would agree with sending it back to the planning board, and also for the planning board to then have the condo committee look at this along with some of the other suggestions that have been brought up for putting on the October warrant.
So when you're suggesting changes to tighten it up, is that in case it passes, or is that in lieu of sending it back to planning?
No, what I wanted to do is say, okay, is this something that we could say to town meeting, look, if you make these 5 changes, it would tighten it up, it can go forward. But I don't think that's the case. I think the best recommendation, in my view, is to send it back to the planning board for further study and bring something forward in October, along with the other zoning articles that we'll be considering for that. So I don't think it could be tightened up even for, not within the scope. But you would have to go outside of the scope, and of course that's not allowed. So.
All right. Anyone else want to be heard on this?
Do you want a motion?
Yep.
I move that we recommend to the warrant committee and to town meeting that the condominium planned unit development article be sent back to the planning board for further study and recommendation at the October 2015 town meeting.
Second.
All right, any discussion? Now, Ms. McKettrick, I think that I saw your hand up, and It may be the last minute, but come on up and,
I'm not sure whether I should have been up here speaking to you before you took that vote. That's why
but we
I have my
haven't
hand up.
taken the vote.
Okay. And I'm not asking you to take a vote
We're in the
on
discussion period.
anything that I'm bringing to you tonight. I just want to explain to you, you know, what's been going on, and you're all aware that you're aware that the working group has been looking at the article that was filed and talking in general about writing condominium zoning, and it's been a very difficult process, because there are a lot of different sites and a lot of different issues, and it's difficult to get your head around how to write zoning that will address all of them at once, and it's entirely possible that that's not what even the working group will come up with in the end. Meanwhile, I represent Todd Hamilton and John Fandry. They own 13.13 acres off Hillside Street and Ford Ranch Road. Mr. Fandry inherited the property in 2005 and has been trying to find a way to develop it that works for everybody since then, and has not arrived at a solution. And everybody's the owners are getting impatient. They want to sell the land. They want to, it's just a land they inherited. They want to get some money for it. So when the working group was formed, and we passed site-specific zoning in October, my advice was that we should defer to the working group process and see what they came up with, and see if they came up with something perhaps by May. And that hasn't been possible. But I think that both the developer and the owner have respected the process and the creation of the working group. I've been to the meetings. You've been very good to allow me to be there and comment, even though I'm not a member of the committee and I represent a developer. And I've learned a lot from that process. But I'm here now in March, as they are, without any zoning that can be considered at this town meeting, with at least one offer on the table for the property that's from a nonprofit, and with other options being looked at that may or may not be attractive in general to the town. But nothing else, you know, and some discussion is hopefully going to get underway now because we have this zoning article. What I did after the last meeting of the working group was to take a rough draft that had been prepared by some members and had started to be discussed that was not site-specific, and to revise it as a site-specific amendment. And I have to call it an amendment, and it actually may be within the scope of the article that's before town meeting, because it's a site-specific condominium zoning article. It's much narrower than the originally filed article. I don't know whether the moderator will accept it, even as an amendment, and I've asked him, but I don't have an answer yet. So the only way this could be considered, which I think you have a copy, but I'm going to pass this around because I may have made a few more corrections, would be as an amendment. If it turns out it can't be considered as an amendment, then it's going to be the subject of, I hope, continued discussion. Because there needs to be a solution of some sort arrived at for this development site that is satisfactory to the developer and the owner and to the immediate neighborhood and to the town. So I think we need to be thinking about this particular site and perhaps a couple of others that may be coming into play or may be for sale. But my focus is on this site. And so this is much more specific and much more detailed. It may not be satisfactory in terms of what people want to see as zoning for the site. And it may be that it isn't acceptable to the neighbors to have any condominium proposal here. But what has happened is the neighbors have, 3 neighbors met with a developer last Friday. They called me over the weekend and they asked me to give them this draft. And I gave it to them in electronic format. You know, they can mark it up and do whatever they want. I don't know what's going to happen going forward, but they talked about trying to meet with others in the neighborhood and to get a discussion underway and see if there would be a way to proceed with this whenever it's possible to do so. I've already explained, I don't know if it can be considered by this town meeting. If it is considered as within the scope of the article filed, it could be an amendment. And the way that would work is the amendment has to be proposed the planning board really would need to decide that they thought this should be considered as an amendment at town meeting. And they would need to advise the warrant committee that they thought it should be considered, at least be discussed. And the warrant committee then might consider making the amendment its recommendation to town meeting. But there's a lot of buts and ifs in between, and you're just getting this and you're going to have to think about it. So I just wanted to give it to you tonight to tell you that the way it could be considered now would be only as an amendment to the article that was filed. Obviously, it could be a warrant article in October, but I'm dealing with some development options, or I'm looking at them with the developer and the owner. They may not be heavily supported by the town, but they're out there. So if we were able to arrive at agreement and if this were acceptable as an amendment to the article filed, it may be that it should be discussed in May. And of course, the risk to that is that something gets discussed before the town meeting, but it doesn't succeed, it fails, it gets a no vote. Then you've got an article in this form that I guess can't be resubmitted for a period of time, because that's the way zoning works. So there's a risk for that. Here's what's happening in the neighborhood is that this fact that the no decision has been arrived at as to how this property will be developed means that properties around it now have an unknown. And when they try to go out and be marketed or be sold, there are questions asked and they can't be answered. I mean, that's a situation that occurs a lot, you know, if you have vacant land behind you or something like that. But there's been kind of a history here and discussion, and anyone who Googles the site is going to see some of that. So it's making it difficult, I think, for some landowners, or one at least, to sell. And that is one reason to try to look at it sooner rather than later, but that's only one reason. And the proposal, or the resulting zoning, if there is to be zoning, it has to be good zoning that works for this site and that the town can get behind. It's very difficult to pass a zoning article, I realize that. I've seen it many times in town meeting, and at this time, there isn't a great deal of time to put into this. I ask you to take a serious look at it, take it, mark it up, critique it, in any case, because I don't think it's wasted effort, because this whole issue of condominium zoning is going to continue to be before you. Meanwhile, if I do get an indication from the moderator that he could consider an amendment, this as an amendment, then I will certainly send that information to everybody, but it's the moderator's decision, so.
Do you have any idea of when that decision might come forward?
I hope soon. I mean, I've communicated with him, but I just don't know. I've asked the question, I've told him that I needed an answer in order to know whether we should try to work on this now.
Have you considered doing it as a special town meeting within the annual town meeting?
I did, but there just isn't time to do that. The regular warrant went to the printer, and this is all because, you know, it's been difficult to come up with a proposal. The working group felt it just wasn't going to be possible for them to do that in time for May, but they still were trying to discuss what had been submitted and how it could be changed as of 2 or 3 weeks ago, and there's still, you know, nothing came out of that meeting. The warrant went to the printer today. The warrant has to be in the homes 1 week before for regular town meeting and 2 weeks before for special town meeting. Mm-hmm. So it would be extremely difficult to submit this as a separate article, because to be assured that you could get it to a printer, get it printed, and get it out in the mail and in homes 2 weeks ahead of time, because if it doesn't get there 2 weeks ahead of time, then that's a flaw and the article still can't be considered. I feel it's simply not possible. My feeling is that, well, maybe you disagree, but.
Well, I was going to say that you could schedule the special for the second Monday instead of scheduling it for the first Monday, and that would give you an additional week to do it.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a possibility.
And I'm bringing this up because I did go through and mark up the draft that we received, and I am concerned, and would certainly be happy to discuss it at this meeting or tomorrow night, however we want to do that. I am concerned that it is out with the scope. It is more restrictive in parts, but it is also a lot more detailed. For example, you've got design standards in here that aren't in the original at all, and while you could look at that as being more restrictive, I don't know that town meeting would have the time to have considered the additional detail prior to voting on it were it to go in as an amendment. So that's a concern that I bring up. It's one of the reasons I wanted to clear the first article, which we know is going in front of town meeting, and have that before we discuss this, but.
Well, I approached
but
it originally that way, so
yeah.
yeah, okay.
So I would consider seeing if the timeline works for a special town meeting, and then that's something we could additionally consider. And then in the meantime, we can look at it and see if it's something that we would recommend for a special, which we may or may not do.
Talk
is the
about that
other
as a
problem.
separate issue, but to
Yeah.
the extent that this is undecided as to whether or not this will be considered as an amendment, I wonder if we should defer our vote as to how we're going to, what we're going to recommend to warrant on this article, either until we have more clarity on that topic, or if we can discuss it, but if our recommendation to warrant is that this is outside of the scope, and we wouldn't recommend pursuing.
Well, I think we're fairly clear on what we would vote on the first article, so
I
that's
agree with that.
reasonable. I think I can withdraw the motion, we can table that until this comes back. But I would say, I would assume that the moderator is also checking with town council to make sure it's within the scope.
Yeah, and I mean,
so-
the problem you raise is, there's a legal issue, and there's
Right.
an issue it's within the authority of the moderator. He makes the decision. But the issue you raise is an important one, which is, do people have adequate notice? I mean, regardless of whether it's technically within the scope or isn't.
Right.
So I can also, I did talk to the selectman staff about this, and I basically got the rundown on what, the warrant was going out
Right.
today, so. Yes, I can check on the possibility for the time frame that you're talking about, just to be able to send some information back to the planning board, because, the moderator himself may want to hear from the planning board on this issue. This is a difficult decision, and if it's controversial, if the scope decision becomes controversial, that in itself becomes something that is a way of,
Right.
weakening the proposal.
Right.
I don't really want to see that happen, so I'll look into the other possibility. Meanwhile, you'll have a couple of days before I get back with an answer. If you have any time to read it and study it, I don't think that's time wasted on the part of the planning board. The planning board is going to be the board that everyone is going to be looking to see what the next step should be. I have given it to some neighbors. They can undertake to discuss it in whatever way they want. They want to meet with the developer, they can. That's their option. It's here, it's a public document. I gave it to the selectmen last night. Anybody who wants to look at it can. The more feedback and thought provided now, the better we're going to be, no matter what we are able to do in May. That's the way I feel. So I thought it was worth the effort to at least try a redraft. I call it a redrafting, but you're right, it looks new to me. There's that scope issue has to do with whether you have notice that something of what's going to be done in the zoning change, and the other one is so broad that there is at least a technical argument that anything that narrows it is still within the scope of the article. But I understand what you're saying too, it just looks different. So if I can answer questions or anything, I will. I know you've got a lot to do tonight. I wanted to be able to get this to you, have it be considered as part of the public hearing process in some fashion, and I will try to get you more information about whether it's possible to submit it as an actual article.
I will withdraw my motion then, and I think we should continue it to tomorrow night. But I'm wondering if there are people here who wanted to speak to this amendment. And rather than have you come back tomorrow night, we do have something that was supposed to have started at 7:15, but maybe you can come up.
I will recuse myself from any participation in discussion of this, but it does seem to me that we do have a public hearing scheduled at 7:15, and if we're, so just...
Should we open the public hearing and continue it until after this continue to after this conversation has gone, or just?
I just say, if we're going to be discussing this amendment, I will turn the discussion over to you, because, as I say, this particular article would likely affect the value of my property. In fact, it may be directly applicable to my property.
In that case. So what I propose that we do is listen to the people who've come here tonight, but reserve our discussion for tomorrow night after after we continue this, because of course we do have a public hearing that's scheduled. Does that sound reasonable? So, ma'am, sir, if you'll come forward.
Once again. Eric Chifellos from Ford Ranch Road. I'm an abutter to the parcel in question that this amendment was submitted for. And given the topography of the land, I'm actually downhill to the property. So it's important to me personally that development is done responsibly. I'll also say that I'm here speaking as an individual abutter, not on behalf of a neighborhood group or organization. And I also, again, keeping it quick, I want to briefly cover the history, which most of you, if not all of you on the board already know. The developer had originally sought to build 3 houses on this lot, which was denied by the planning board for various reasons. I was not in the neighborhood until after that happened. I will say I would have supported 3 homes, but I wasn't in the neighborhood then, so I had no involvement. Since that application was denied, again, as you all know, the new cluster zoning bylaw was passed that would allow the developer to build 8 homes on the land. The neighbors have conveyed to the developer that we would support him in that. I do understand that he's seeking to do a more dense development. And as Attorney McKittrick said, we are working with him to try and find a development that we can support that is also financially attractive enough for him to undertake. So last Friday, a few of us met with him regarding the proposed 45-unit plan. We promised to give feedback, which we're working on. He promised to share some concept plans that I understand he's provided the town and maybe some members of the board. So we look forward to reviewing those as well once we get them. But I'm here to express the concern with the amendment as it was delivered to us over the weekend. I'm going to jump through a few high-level concerns. Again, it was a cursory reading, so I want to reserve some comments as I have an opportunity to go through it more. But the first concern is, while it is intended to be site-specific, it does seem broad enough to apply to other sites, including potentially Mr. Whiteside, so both existing sites and sites that could be easily assembled. Second, the proposed development is too dense. We're in a AA zoning district, which has 2-acre zoning. This development is obviously much more dense than that. The main entrance for this development is Ford Ranch Road, which is a dead-end road, has currently 10 homes. So the development would increase the number of the homes off of our street by 550%, more than 5 times the number of homes we have now. Again, this is a small dead-end road with 10 homes. A development of this magnitude would drastically change the character of our neighborhood overnight. Third, the bylaw doesn't distinguish between uplands and wetlands. The ground in our area is very wet. Allowing wetlands to increase density means more units on uplands, which would have a negative effect on the water table. Again, being downhill from the property, that's a big concern for me. Fourth, in the first section of the amendment, reference is made to open space and protective buffers, but the bylaw calls for a minimum of only 30% of the total area to be open land, which is much too low for a development of this type in the zoning district of the town that allows the lowest density. From my research in similar districts in Belmont, Newton, and Brookline, the minimum amount of open space is 50%, 70%, and 80% respectively.
Can you say those towns again, please?
Yep. Belmont is 50%, Newton is 70%, and Brookline is 80%. If you look at the open space requirement in the zoning district with the largest lot minimums. Finally, due to the shape of the subject lot, I believe more attention needs to be given to the setback requirements. I'll leave it at that. I am committed to working with the developer. I personally do believe that a development could be designed for the site that the neighborhood should support, and that would be financially attractive to the developer, but this proposal is not it. The zoning that applies to the site should ensure that density is appropriate for the area and that open space is preserved. I do look forward to continuing to work with the developer to try and find a workable balance, and hope he will continue to engage us in a dialogue. But for these reasons, I ask that you not favor the proposed amendment, but that you do all continue to support us working with the developer as we try to find a mutually agreeable solution.
Great, Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question? I know we're not having discussion, but in case he's not
Quick
coming back
question,
tomorrow
yeah.
night, just a quick question. Did you give the developer a date by which you would provide comments?
No, not yet.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ma'am? Yeah.
Good evening, I'm Judy George, and on June 10th will be my 50th anniversary living in Milton. And hopefully, I've raised 4 children, 11 grandchildren, and I love this town. I'm going to get emotional. My husband said, "No, Judy, don't get emotional." I want to grow. I want the town to be healthy. It deserves to be healthy. It's a great town. There's no town like it. But I think there's a way to do it that doesn't punish neighborhoods. There's a way to build and to explore opportunities to protect the tax base of the town, which is, first I had a 40B threat hanging over me that the whole neighborhood got up in arms. So now I am the treasurer of the Scotswoods Defense Fund. But I'm here as a human being. And I really want to support that Mr. Hamilton deserves the right to make money. Everybody deserves the right. I was a retailer. I had 38 stores. I sit on many boards. We all have the right to have a reasonable amount of money, but please don't destroy my neighborhood in doing it. There's a way that I'm sure if Mr. Hamilton was happy at one time with 3 homes, and maybe 8 homes are not enough, there might be some number that we could all live with. My house would be the one that would go by on both sides. And I have deer, and I can't explain to you what it's like to live there. I was somewhat of a bride. I'm going to give my age away. But I want to make sure that the town knows that I'm also for affordable housing. Whatever we do, we should never not think that there should be a place for people to come to. So it is not about, I know there's been a lot of talk in the media about our area, our neighborhood. We are socioeconomic. I was born in Everett, raised in Quincy, and saved all our money to move to Milton. So we have a combination of ethnicity and financial strength, but it's a really special place. Hillside Street, the Scotswoods area, and I don't know. I hope I live to be 100, but I really do want to try to keep the neighborhood somewhat, while still, to the gentleman's, we need to raise taxes, and the threat of a church doesn't scare me. That isn't why I'm here, because now, first it was the 40B, and now it's the church. And Marion was very kind to try to bring some. We asked her, I was one of the 3 at the meeting with Mr. Hamilton, to try to see what his vision was. But I would fight pretty hard against a 45 development plus affordable housing. I just think it would destroy the whole area as we know it. So thank you so much for allowing me to speak. I know how valuable your time is. I admire and respect this group for the time you put into it. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Does anybody else wish to speak on this article? In that case, we're going to continue it to tomorrow night. What's the time, Tim or Emily? Haven't continued
I think it's
anything?
for 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock? All right, we're going to continue it to tomorrow at 7. And Alex, welcome back.
Okay. Now we're going to have a public hearing on an application. Let me get the application out. An application for a special permit, and the application says it's by the Oldfield Family LLC, and that that's the owner, and that the applicants are Maggie Oldfield and Josh Oldfield, and the company is Their Nursery. So, in any event, this is a special permit, a request for a special permit to conduct a landscaping business at premises on Hillside Street and forestry. And I guess there is one item that we should deal with. I've got a letter from Philip Johanning, who expressed dismay at what he considered to be rude treatment by me at our recent hearing on February 12th, when I opened the floor to questions to the building commissioner. And it had appeared to me that Mr. Johanning was getting into wanted to get into a discussion with the building commissioner about the Dover Amendment, and I ruled that he was out of order. I'm sorry that he feels that I treated him badly. I was trying to conduct the meeting in a manner that was efficient and expeditious. And, but as I say, I'm sorry if he feels that he was badly treated, because we don't like people to feel that way. We want them to feel like they've been fairly treated and respectfully treated. So, why don't we hear from the applicant? And let's, as you recall, when the solar panels fell off the town hall roof and the town hall was closed, the town administrator said all meetings tonight are canceled. And when the continued public hearing on the Thayer application was canceled, that meant that we had to start up the hearing from scratch. And that's what we're doing. We have an application that was filed several. It's all in one place, in one document. And we're going to, we're going to hear whatever relevant people have to say about this application, and we're going to determine what to do on the basis of the application and the circumstances. So
just a point of clarification, does that mean that previous testimony is not applicable?
It's not applicable.
Thank you.
But if it is all on tape, and the tapes can be can probably be resurrected and played to get it back on the record.
Got it.
Mr. Corcoran.
Thank you very much, Mr. Whiteside. Edward Corcoran, on behalf of the applicants, the Oldfield family and Thayer Nursery, which has submitted a new application for special permit under the zoning bylaw that was approved last May at town meeting, dealing with the landscape business use. I don't know what the specific section of the bylaw is, as it has been written in, but it is the new bylaw that was approved last May. I'm pleased to be here on behalf of Maggie and Josh Oldfield, and look forward to engaging the board with discussion. There is a new application. I worked hard to keep it as simple as possible. It may or may not have achieved that goal, but I think at the end, it's sifted down. It is, in fact, a fairly simple, straightforward application to allow the landscaping use that had previously existed on the site to be reintroduced at the site at 270, the primary site at 270 Hillside Street. There are several parcels involved. That the family and the LLC own together. I think there was perhaps a preliminary item. I received yesterday a memorandum from Matt Dunn on behalf of Messrs. Rowe and Johanning, questioning whether or not Oldfield Family LLC and Thayer are the proper applicants. I have submitted a responsive memorandum today. I emailed it. I think everybody has copies. I have additional copies as well. And quite simply, as I read the bylaw, it simply says that the planning board may grant a special permit for a landscaping business on such lot or lots, provided that the applicant or applicants or their predecessors in interest on that date, July 12, 2012, held a special permit or use variance issued by the Board of Appeals with respect to that lot. That's simply, as I read that, precatory language that is a ticket for entry. The applicants or their predecessors in interest had to own the property and had to operate and had to have a special permit with respect to the premise. 2012, the Oldfields owned the property, and Margaret Oldfield, who is Maggie's mother, and the children, pursuant to the permits, had permits to operate on that property. Oldfield Family LLC and Thayer Nursery are successors in interest, and they are related to what was previous to the previous ownership, and they have the right to apply. So it's
All
fairly
right.
simple and straightforward.
We hear your rebuttal, but we will hear from Mr. Dunn later on, and he can set forth his argument, and we may have some questions for you.
So I just thought I would address that up front. With respect to that, I'd like to spend a little bit of time with the conditions of the property. And highlight a couple of things in the application. I'll do that. There was essentially one new and fundamental piece of information that was provided with the new material, and that is a table that's entitled 2012 Volumes of Material that I think is fundamental, is how much material was Thayer Nursery receiving in 2012, and what, in terms of their landscaping, through the overall use of the property. The property does encompass nursery, agriculture, and landscaping business. They received in 2012 a total of 3,300 cubic yards of Nutrimulch. That's one of their big things. They received a total of 55 deliveries to the property with respect to that over the course of about 40 weeks. A portion of that Nutrimulch is delivered to customers. A portion is sold in smaller quantities at retail to customers who come to the site, and a portion of that is spread on the property itself as part of the nursery. Hemlock mulch, 1,000 cubic yards, playground chips, 350 cubic yards, loam, Nutrisoil, all as identified on the table. And separately, they have sold since the 60s firewood, both for delivery from the premises and for purchase in smaller quantities at the site. They're currently limited to selling for smaller quantities at the site, and they deliver from off-site location in Canton. Yes.
Just wanted to check, it doesn't actually say that in the application that was 2012, so you're confirming that those are the 2012
Those are 2012
Okay.
volumes. I think, my understanding as I read the bylaws, the baseline was 2012.
It is,
The
it just
activity.
wasn't specified as such. I just want to clarify that.
Oh, thank you for that. So firewoods are broken down in terms of cords, the balance of the material broken down in terms of cubic yards. They are delivered in varying size trucks. The Nutrimulch, the firewood, are delivered in large 18-wheel trucks with enclosed boxes. Other materials are delivered in smaller vehicles. And the total number of deliveries to the site during each of the seasons is identified. Nutrimulch, for example, 55 deliveries is the largest set of deliveries. The firewood at 50 during the firewood season, or starting and leading up through the firewood season at 50. And it identifies so the average of deliveries per week, relatively small, and occasionally maximum deliveries per week, so that at the start of the season, they may receive up to 4 deliveries per week of Nutrimulch as they're sort of storing up and stocking, and then will periodically be refilling as they go. So the total over a 40-week period, they're really averaging somewhere between somewhere slightly less than 2 deliveries per week. It's about a half a delivery a day. So when you break it down completely, there are a total of, if you take firewood out, there were a total of 203 deliveries of the combined materials over that 40-week period, averaged about 1 delivery per day. Some days there would be more than 1, other days there would be none, but it was an average of 1 delivery to the site per day. So 203 deliveries divided by 40 weeks comes out to approximately 1 delivery per day. The firewood, 50 deliveries divided by a 31-week period. It's actually the same time frame is 1.6 deliveries per week. Again, early in the season, they might have 4 to stock up inside the barn, and then weeks where there will be no deliveries at all, or perhaps 1 delivery. So the maximum deliveries would be occasional, and so they would only be ordering and restocking as necessary in accordance with the time. Other materials we previously provided, but gave a list of the vehicles. 2012, those vehicles remain the same. They have not changed. There's a schedule of expected replacement that's included, identified with the vehicles. So with that, what I'd like to do is spend a little bit of time proposed with the plan, and I think the easiest thing to do in this room, I think it's easier to work with these paper plans as opposed to do any sort of PowerPoint, because it's very difficult. It's more difficult to see on the monitor than it is, at least in this room. So, and I will. So this is the existing conditions plan prepared by DeSalle and Burke. This is a plan that is essentially the same since last year when we were preparing and showing plans for the town meeting process. Modified in December because there was some additional infill with respect to description of the buildings, which correspond to the building descriptions in the application, location of lights shown in red, and whatnot. So the closest building to any lot line is the rear of the wood barn, which is on the southerly lot line, north, essentially this way towards Hillside Street. Southerly lot line is here. The Pam Lepore family owns this large lot to the south. Cole, Johanningen Row, and Tevens own the 3 lots that abut on the easterly side on Parkwood Drive, and then Hillside Street and Forest Street as shown. The primary entrance to the property, really the only real entrance to the property itself, is off of, is a curb cut off of Forest Street with a driveway in to a gravel entryway parking area. There's a nursery stock area to the left as you come in that's on the corner of Hillside and Forest. Josh Oldfield lives at 24 Forest Street, which is this lot within the broader square. Their sister lives and 270, single family. Here, which its own driveway, their sister is not involved in the business. She's separate, but she does live here. And then Maggie lives, and their mother live across the street, separate houses at 237 and 217, and they own the property that's to the rear. So the buildings include a barn with display areas inside, a garden shop, which is where they primarily operate their sales. They have a cash machine, a cash register, and their office is in this building, bathrooms for themselves and employees, and a small retail area where they display goods that are related to to the landscaping and their nursery operation. To the rear is a greenhouse and a lath house back here. And then there is a large, what they call wood barn, with a wide opening that faces to Hillside Street. And to the rear of that is a shed in which is stored the diesel fuel tank that exists, that's been permitted by the town fire department, inspected by the state fire marshal, and a tools shed shop to there. Relative heights are shown. Relative area of each is shown. There's a small shed-type building here, and currently there's a bocce court back here, which is shown to be removed. The existing, or the historic location of operations, particularly dealing with the landscaping business as it grew, was back in the rear. And there's a substantial area of paved and dense packed gravel in the rear. If you remember the aerial photos we showed from before, a large mulch pile was located back in that area. Other equipment was stored, materials was stored. All of the activity was back here. It was loud, it was noisy, it was dusty, it smelled. It was not a very good neighbor. Current proposed conditions and drainage plan prepared also by DeSelle and Burke, dated revised February 25, 2015. And we can break it down into sections. There are sections that were provided. Really shows what is proposed to reset the site, to buffer the operations associated with the landscaping uses and whatnot. So, starting with the area to the rear, where the operations used to exist, they would remove approximately 10,000 square feet of impervious material, paved area and dense gravel area, and replace that with new nursery stock. It would be a new nursery grow-out area. Occasionally trees would be planted and removed as part of the nursery operation. They proposed to install a fence that would be 10 feet in height, located on a new retaining wall that's been installed above sort of a low level of the property. It's founded as shown on the grading on the plan, at elevation 184. And they propose a 10-foot fence, which the top of fence would be 12 feet above the highest point on the row Johanning property line, which is at 178. There's a berm along that property line. There's a depression and then a berm that comes up in an area that sort of drains down in the rear. All of the activities that occurred here previously would be moved. They do show some parking here, which would be for vehicles only. Their nursery vehicles only. At the end of the day, they would not be moved. They wouldn't be used back there. They would just be stored there when not in use. There is a recycle compost area exists today. That's where the the dumpster would be located, and be materials periodically filled at the end of the day, filled, unloaded by hand, so it'd be quiet operation, and then taken out between 10 and 2. The only time that they could change out dumpster would be weekdays between the hours of 10 and 2. So moving operations from here, the proposal is to then, and as we've shown for quite a while, is a plan to move those operations to this area. And we've worked hard to try to arrive at a plan that would buffer the impacts as much as we can. Originally, an earlier plan shown at a prior hearing, we had a plan that showed a direction of travel for trucks making deliveries to the site, forward-only travel. Any vehicle, any truck moving on the site would be a forward-only movement to eliminate the backup noise as much as possible, would be coming around this way. That brings the trucks to fairly close to the Lepore line, and particularly for the taller trucks, the 48-foot trucks delivering wood and mulch. Those are 12 feet tall. You would see the top of them as they came by. So understanding that impact would have an alternative proposal has been we've developed. We eliminate that forward only. As I read the OSHA regulations dealing with backup requirements, you're not required to operate a backup alarm under 2 circumstances. One, if there's a clear view to the rear. So for example, the Bobcats have a seat, they have an open area the operator can see behind. They don't need to operate a Bobcat with a backup alarm. And second, if there is someone who is directing traffic behind, you do not need to engage the backup alarm. So most of the time, I'm not saying that all of the time, most of the time, any vehicles that are operating within this area, their own equipment has plenty of room substantially to move circular in a forward direction, occasionally backing to a bin if they're going to be loaded from a bin. But they can move as much as possible forward or without use of the backup alarm if there's someone available to help clear the path. So in addition to eliminating that, the proposal is for a 1-foot berm along the southerly property line on which would be planted with a 8-foot fence with sound attenuation placed on the fence along this length, substantially the length of the property from a point that is beyond the southeasterly corner of the barn, about 240 feet towards almost to Forest Street. And that would be essentially 9 feet of height between the operations there and the property line. They've proposed taller evergreen plantings between the fence and the property line. Have offered to meet with Ms. Lepore and work with her to specifically locate, whether on their property, on her property, or combination thereof. But they would be essentially 12 and 14-foot evergreens to start, which would grow and form sort of an upper-level visual and noise barrier above that 9-foot fence level. On the other side, when you get beyond, you need a path of travel between that fence and the rear of the barn. So once you get beyond there, there's a point on here where they would propose to install arborvitae and other plantings on this side, currently showing about another 6 or 7 feet over from the edge of fence. So a total of about 21 feet from the property line to that edge. The operations, though, would occur further away. They're proposing 6 material bins, essentially concrete block bins on the westerly side of the barn, 3 slightly larger bins along the easterly boundary of Josh's dwelling. These would be 13 feet wide by 30 feet deep by 8 feet in height, and these would be 15 feet wide, otherwise 30 feet deep. And all of the materials, the mulches would be stored here, closer to Josh. This would be for stone and other materials that are identified. So the closest point that the bins are to the property line is 49 feet. That's shown as that setback line. So in essence, all of the activity that would be happening here is really 50 feet or more away from that southerly property line. So trucks that would be delivering would come in, back in, offload, and out. Trucks that would be delivering firewood separately, pull in, back into the barn, offload inside the barn, and back out. What's interesting, and tonight I won't do it, but if the board would like to see it, I'll put up either tomorrow night, YouTube videos of how these trucks operate, because they are quiet. It's pretty amazing. They're not dumps. They don't open up and bang to unload. There is this remarkable mechanism that a truck can pull into the back, open its door, and there's what they call a walking floor. Essentially, it's a floor that engages hydraulically, and it moves, piping underneath, moves the surface of the floor 1 foot. It comes back and unlocks, and it moves it again. And the material simply walks forward. And so a very small portion falls off the back end as it goes. It unloads quietly. It can be controlled. And once it's empty, out it goes. So the larger trucks are actually quiet. And I'll demonstrate that tomorrow evening when I put up YouTube video. I think I referenced a site in the materials where you could look at those trucks. So the mulches and the wood, larger quantities are received in that way. Some of the smaller quantities come in dump trucks that would operate more in the traditional way. The other proposal is to install, and they've actually installed, the drainage trench, which runs essentially most of the property line, just inside the property line, is 3 feet deep. It's lined with filter fabric. It's got various size stone. It will be covered, and that, because of the berm and the fact that all of this area drains from the Blue Hill, and the elevation changes. It's 196 this corner, down to 178 or 182 as you get off the property, and it keeps going that way. All of Blue Hill drains down Forest Street and in that direction. We didn't want the situation where water would deflect back off of this berm back onto the Lepori property line. So the idea was to capture that drainage here, bring it to 2 underground leaching pits here so that it would leach away. Separately, as we go to the other side, we've designed an underground system. The low part of the property is defined by elevation 182, which comes through here and back around and down. There is a lower level in here. It's more like 181 and 180 here. And so everything on this site drains to this area. Because this area is naturally pervious with all of the nursery stock exists, it receives it fairly well. But in high storm times, that there is a fair amount of water that sheets in that direction. And so they're going to propose to install an underground Cultec system, 12 Cultecs, which would be filled with stone, receive and recharge water under, and then tie through a manhole here to the town's drain. It would be captured, be cleaned of any material that would be in the water, and then move into the drain system. Jim Burke, Jim DeSalle, and have met. I've been in contact with John Thompson, Joe Lynch. They've designed this. And they're working, I don't know whether they've gotten a permit yet to do that work, but they have, the town engineers have agreed that that would be an appropriate way to handle and improve a drain system now. Right now, any water that comes towards this area just comes over a wall, down onto the street, and goes. So it would be an improvement to the town's drain system with respect to Hillside Street, and would certainly be an improvement. The combination of the removal of impervious and the replacement with the nursery stock with the pervious surface, the new drain system here and the drain system here, we think is a significant overall improvement to how the site drainage will work and what effect, if any, how that site will now affect other properties. We also show the location of lights. There are a number of low-level lights identified in word form, and 4 other lights, 1,000-watt spotlights, really good size, high-powered, that are located at different locations. The 2 on top of the eaves of the garden shop are at about 22 feet. One faces to the north, one faces to the south across what would be the land care yard. There's one here on the corner of the barn at about 13 feet. There's another one at the wood barn, another one at the corner of the barn that faces to the east. Those are also at about 13 feet. They are bright. They light the world up. There are 3 conditions that we would propose. One is that they would point them down, 2, put on a cover, and 3, turn them off. And at the latest, 10 o'clock. Should be. The lighting plan that we had provided shows that the effect of the light essentially dissipates as it gets off the property, down to 1 and 0. Candle power, that just shows the effect of the light as you get out. We know it is bright. It is bright beyond, it's highly visible beyond the property lines. That ought to be addressed. And so the proposal is, as I said, covers, point down, and turn off. We also propose some additional plantings. I've met with the Coles, some additional plantings here. Coles are happy for some infill, as we understand it, for visually buffer what's happening. So that's the, I think, extent of the proposed. From a parking perspective, we show parking. This is generally speaking, a very, very quiet use relative to coming and going of traffic. As I said, a couple of deliveries per day of materials coming in and out. But parking, you know, I'm there often, and I'm often the only car. Maybe I see, can be on weekend, can be during the week. I might see 1 or 2 others. There are 13 or 16 spaces that are proposed for customers, 10 along the side as you pull in the main drive, 3 parallel on the other side, 14, 15, and 16 the greenhouse. Then there are 17 through 24 which are dedicated to employees. There are 8 spaces for employees, but there aren't 8 employee vehicles. Most of them come together in carpool. And so there are 2 or 3 vehicles generally there for employees. And then the remainder of the spaces in the rear are for sort of that in the evening, turn the equipment off, back here, out of sight. Total of 34 spaces, which we think more than adequate given the the routine activities of the site. We do know that the town allows, and they do have a sort of a couple of other special events, particularly around the Christmas season, and they do get police details, and so on those evenings, the facility's fairly well overrun with parking, but it's on a one-off, maybe once on occasion, a couple of times a year when that occurs. So they do get police detail, they do direct for parking, try to limit where people can park on the side. So with respect to deliveries of materials to the site, and one of the issues, there is a concern about how do trucks get there. And the first thing I want to say with respect to trucks is that there is a fairly large volume of trucks. We haven't counted all of the trucks, but there's a lot of other activity out here. There is by no means the bad guy with respect to the volume of trucks. We know that there's a new house under construction up the street. There's another one that's about to start down the road. There's other construction activity around. Those trucks are coming and going. There's a horse farm over here, which receives deliveries and materials. There are other activities that go on. And given the way that I think Siri now operates, and the fact that Milton is becoming more and more of a cut-through, more and more vehicles are coming through, and they're just finding ways to get there. But with respect to deliveries, we acknowledge it is important that their control the activity of truck deliveries coming to and from their site, and that it be done in appropriate timeframes. Bylaw is very strict in terms of what it authorizes in terms of deliveries between the hours of 9 and 3. Dumpsters, removal and replacement between the hours of 10 and 2. They have proposed a couple of things. One is a standard set of directions, which would require that all trucks delivering to the site would come from 93 to Route 28, Randolph Avenue, come in Randolph Avenue to the light at Hillside, take the left on Hillside, come in, make that wide turn in and into the site, and then as they're leaving, they would make that turn out and back out the other way. Forest Street ought to be off limits. Hillside Street, Chickatabbit ought to be off limits. And so they will provide every vehicle delivering a standard set of directions, telephone numbers, email to call, clear set of directions as to when they can come. They may not come in, idle in the neighborhood, and whatnot. With respect to damage that may occur, we know that this edge of property here occasionally gets rutted. I think this is really maybe within the town's right-of-way, but it's a grassy surface. Certainly, right outside of the fence is a narrow strip between the fence and the edge of the pavement. In any event, currently they have placed sort of larger boulders out there that obviously make it difficult for trucks to drive over, but they would propose to replace that with some hard pack. Eliminate the soft shoulder, really make it a hard pack shoulder that's consistent with what exists along the Thayer property line, which can withstand that weight of vehicle. Similarly, would do so if there's any damage across the street. I'm not aware of any that's happening. This seems to be the location where the damage may be occurring, but certainly would be responsible for replacing and restoring any damage. If I can just have a moment. dust and odor. There are times, given time of year, when this is, particularly July, August, this can be a pretty dry place. And because it is a nursery, there is soils. As I indicated previously, there was a hard gravel, pervious, relatively impervious surface that would get dusty, particularly in the summer. There are, and they propose to relocate, there are a total of 20 sprinklers on the property, really most of them for irrigation of existing nursery stock so that it's out there during the summer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This corner, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 within this area. There are currently 5 sprinklers within the area that would become the land care yard, and there are some other sprinklers out here. They would propose to relocate the sprinklers that are in the land care yard to locations at the rear corners of the material bins, as required on a seasonal basis during the drier season, would ensure that those are turned on at least 3 times per week for a period of 15 minutes each time. That would, and make sure that this area was properly, and then hand spray other areas that would be susceptible to dust. That would damp the dust and contain that dust. Odor, the primary odor, I think, is really from the mulches that would go in these bins that sprinklers would help to contain that odor. The new plantings along here will capture odor that would come this way. The prevailing wind goes this way, but obviously the wind swirls at different times. But it would capture odor at those the heights of those trees. Odors, we don't believe any more odors would be leaving property in that direction, certainly not in any way remotely the way they did a couple of years ago when the mulch pile existed here. And I'll leave it at that for the moment and ask the board if the board has any questions.
I think that maybe we would like to hear about the drainage.
So Jim DeSell is here from DeSell and Burke to talk more specifically about that and answer questions that the board may have.
How you doing? The site drains more or less this way here, and Ned spoke about controlling the water that was going to hit the berm here by putting in this trench with a stone swale that will go into a leaching pit. And then,
Is there any way you could stand on the other side?
Sure.
So you can see what's going on?
the water coming across here from the LaPolla property would hit this swale, dump down into a catch basin or a drain manhole, and get recharged into the ground through a leaching pit cluster in this area here. The rest of the water pretty much flows in this direction now. Anything that's not captured by this here would get captured by this Caltech system that we have right now. You can see during some real heavy rainstorms when I've gone by in the past, and you can see water breaking through the wall. That would be taken care of with the Caltech system here. There'll be some pre-treatment. Then there'd be an overflow pipe into a drain manhole that would go from the catch basin that would go into the town system. But that would be a secondary system if there was just a torrential.
So the Caltech is designed to recharge?
Yes,
It's just overflowing into the town sewer.
exactly. What it is, it sits on a bed of stone, and it's like an upside-down plastic U. The water goes into it, and then if it does have too much capacity, it will overflow into the system, instead of right now going through the wall and into the system. as it is. And in the drainage calcs that we provided, you can see the pre- and post-development peak flows are reduced on every storm event, and we will meet the mass stormwater management requirements. We're still working on the fine-tuning this with the town. We've talked to John Thompson, but it's not, 100%. They still may want something different.
Let's assume that there's a lot of fertilizer in the water as it comes down to this system. How does this system clean it before it gets discharged into the...
Right now, the water just
Right,
flows outside.
it goes right over the top of the wall. It doesn't, it pours over.
I've seen, yeah, I mean, there's been, you drive by, and you're like, whoa. But it actually, when it goes into the catch basin, it'll be deep sump catch basin, and then the water's actually gonna go into the Caltech system, and that will filter through the stone and everything else, which will clean it.
And
So
have you sized this system so that your reduction is how much?
The off-site flows, you can see it's in the report. In a 2-year storm, you go from 8.7 CFS to 8.5 CFS. And in a 100-year storm, you go from 2938 CFS to 2502.
But this is, I mean, all the development has occurred before you're talking about what the production is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've got a development that's there, which is producing drainage, and you're going to somewhat reduce the amount of that, but it doesn't really address what the flow might have been before the development occurred,
For which development?
before the development of the nursery.
We have, well, you're talking 100 years ago?
Well, I'm talking, I'm just, I mean, when you do when you do buildings, you have to reduce the amount of water so that you have basically the same characteristics.
Correct.
And here you're just doing what seems to be a fairly arbitrary reduction of 0.2%. How big is the reduction in percentage?
I don't have those exact numbers. I mean, we're reducing the runoff,
Somewhat.
which is what the requirement
Somewhat.
is, which is, and we're going to meet, we meet mass stormwater management policies. What we did was the existing conditions, which we're calling, which is out there right now, which is on the, what we surveyed in 2012 and 13, whenever we did the original survey. We have the total impervious areas, and, so that's what we're basing the existing runoffs from, with what's literally was out there at the time. It's changed a little bit since then, and then what we did was we took into effect any of the changes that we had, and in most of the areas, we've reduced the impervious area. So what we're doing now is we're collecting the water and we're letting it out in a slower fashion. So we're reducing the runoff from, I mean, is there a percentage that you would want? That's.
Well, it does seem to me that you're doing this to make things better, and the question is how much better are you making things?
Okay.
And you're the engineer.
I know what you're saying, and I mean, as long as we meet the requirements of the state standards.
But you can tell us what.
You had cubic feet per second, and just tell them what the
What's the
percentage is.
percentages?
Could you also tell, just say what,
No.
and also just say what the state standard is?
Yep.
It might be helpful as well.
What about the leaching pit? How big is that?
This leaching pit here?
Yeah.
It's a double cluster, I believe. They're 6-foot diameter. You can see in the detail, it's 82-inch with 4 feet of stone between them, 2 feet on the outside. It's a good size.
82-inch diameter, by what depth?
3.5 feet to the inlet.
And if you had 3 of those, would that be better than 2?
Yeah.
Your third bet.
It'd be, or 50% better. It just is, I mean, the question is,
They're designed on the flows. And
you
yeah, if you wanna put another
designed
one-
the flows to be more or less constant, with a little bit of improvement, rather than designing them to try and make a lot of improvement.
Look, I can get the percentage, what the percentage.
You said a 2-year storm, right?
Say that again?
You were saying you were working on a 2-year storm,
We just did all of them.
so those shouldn't overflow when you
Nope.
peak. So that's how you design it.
Yeah, and it doesn't have an overflow. This is the inlet coming from
No,
the
no, I
next
know,
well.
but I mean, it shouldn't bubble off the
No,
the top.
absolutely not.
That should contain the maximum in the 2-year storm
Yep,
from the swell.
exactly, just that piece that gets hit by that.
And you, the initial calculation, like you said, had more impervious land area, and now you have land area that will permeate.
Correct. This
And
whole,
that's the calculation used.
that's what we based it on,
The
yes.
second. So what did you get for a percentage?
I'll get you the number for tomorrow.
And if you could bring it along with the, if you could tell the board the standard
Okay.
and what you're achieving, that would be helpful.
No problem.
Thank you.
And what is the purpose of the swales?
The swale is because we're putting the berm in to create height for the fence and the trees. It just gives us a little bit more height, but, right off the bat. So what happens is, instead of the water just coming down here and flowing like this and heading over to this corner now, we're collecting it in this swale and discharging it into this dry well system.
They assume the swell goes down in elevation as
Yes.
it goes to the...
Yeah.
And is there a swale on the east side?
There's a swale in here.
What's that for?
That just collects the water that comes down to this area here,
And where does it go?
over to here.
Do you think that was created naturally? Is that a natural?
No, this has been, there's like a
Cut by
little, there's a
water?
ditch.
So the ditch collects the water and it washes down the ditch
Some of it, yeah.
into the collection system.
Is there an existing catch basin up in the corner?
No, that's, we're putting that in.
There is no catch basin on the
There's a
street?
catch basin out in the street.
Yeah, in the street.
Yeah.
There is one on top.
There's one up top and out in the street, presently.
And I assume that the catch basin on top today is just a recharge without treatment. It's just it's not connected to the town sewer.
No, nothing connected to the town sewer.
So it's like a dry well.
It's a dry well. Thank you. Yeah, dry well.
With a precast unit in there.
The Caltech, the same as the swale, obviously goes down in elevation towards the, it's not a catch basin, it's just a drain manhole.
This here's a catch basin that overflows into the Caltex, and the Caltex are flat.
Okay.
So the system here, and they disconnect. And then there's an overflow.
It looks like a, would look like a Quonset hut.
Yep, exactly. It's corrugated
Covered
plastic.
with stone.
Yep, it's all surrounded by
We left-
stone.
We actually left voids underneath.
Yep.
Does the Caltech require maintenance
Yes, there's
to
observation
clean
points.
it out
Yep.
and whatnot to get rid of those
I-
sediments that are falling into the system?
Ideally, it should be relatively clean water with the hood and the sun. But there's inspection ports to make sure that the stone and everything else
That
is.
gets submitted as
Correct.
part of, so that would be submitted as part of the
And O&M, yeah.
permit here? Okay, great.
Yeah, your sump's collecting solids. so you-
That's how you
Burn that
reduce
out.
the total percentage of solids.
Who said that? Of course. But you have to come up.
There's a mic here.
I was wondering,
Identify yourself, please, just for the record.
my name is Phil Johanning, I live at 23 Parkwood Drive. On the page where you showed that When was that installed?
This,
Yes.
that's not in it.
Oh,
No. The only thing that's installed, I'm sorry, is this swale that's here now.
right. And since the installation, we have never had flooding like we have today. Never. What you have done by creating this trench is you've created a flooding system for our yard and our house and our basement that has never been as bad as it is today. I would urge you people never to complete half a project so that we have nothing but catastrophe every time the skies open up. And I'll give you these to take a quick look, and you might pass them around. But this is incredibly unfair, what you have done to us.
Okay, this.
Take a
I
look
guess-
at all of them. Take a look at all. I urge you, because that will help you to design a better system than exists today, because all of this runs downhill right into our yard.
Is it- does the drain manhole exist at the end of the swale right now?
No.
Well, you can ask a question, but we're not taking, you're going to have plenty of time to, but do ask the
I
question.
want to ask a question of the
Okay,
drainage man.
Ask him. Okay.
I just want to, this is my property here, and what has happened is you've dug a ditch here, and all the water comes into the ditch and then flows over into my property. There's a berm here, so no water from here gets to the street, none. And in order to properly drain this, you need to extend the ditch or piping or something from here, because all the water ends up right here. Even when you put the cisterns in here, where's the water gonna go? It's gonna seep and come into this ditch. None of it's gonna go this way. I'm not an engineer, but I know gravity. You dug a ditch.
This is the new one?
Yes, this is the new dig that they, a ditch that
That was,
they dug.
yeah. And since we did the survey, the initial survey, there has been some digging in here, which we have to go back out. We can't because of the storm. And we'll readdress that disturbance that's happened
Okay.
last few months ago.
So, I mean, you're suggesting that the swale has to be a drainage swale and not a ponding swale.
I would think so, because it just overflows, it goes right over our stone wall into our property.
That makes some sense.
No, that's right.
And this is why we're upset. You're an engineer.
We did,
And-
this wasn't,
But
when we started, it's there.
It's there now.
And
Yeah,
we have to address
That's
that.
what
We
I
just have
wanted
to.
to address.
Okay, all right.
I just would like to, I'd like to comment, to be fair to the engineers who have designed it, they did not have anything to do with the installation. And to the extent that those conditions are occurring, we will certainly ask, it's been 2 months since, it's been nothing but snow on the ground, so to test those conditions today is impossible. But we will evaluate those and respond accordingly. I think it's appropriate that we do that, and do that as quickly as we can.
All right, well, that's good. Other questions about drainage, yes?
Not about drainage.
Oh, not about drainage. Well, since you're probably not going to be here, are you coming tomorrow?
He has to give us our percentages.
Okay, well then, what's the,
I have a question about the trucks. Seems like the loading patterns, previously when we discussed this, there were discussions about the trucks going around the wood barn. It seems like that's been changed because of the OSHA discoveries that you made, but in any
No.
case, before you answer, if the trucks aren't going around the wood barn anymore, what is the purpose of the drive that's there now?
That drive needs to exist because the diesel fuel tank is back here.
So it's still used by some.
Yeah, it's
Delivery
used
vehicle.
it will be used. It'll be used occasionally. As a diesel truck delivery comes in, they will park, they will load, they'll pull around and out. And there needs to be, from a fire safety perspective, a distance. Right.
So
There needs to be fire access to the back of the barn for fire trucks, so we
it's
can't.
primarily limited to the diesel. If there was a condition saying that that was limited to diesel and emergency, that would be acceptable?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, the the notion of eliminating that forward only, particularly with the taller trucks, was to eliminate those from the view of the Lepori property. You can see it above the top of the fence. So by moving it out, they're taken out of the field of view in large trucks.
When these large trucks come in, you expect that 99% of the time there's going to be somebody there directing them.
Yeah, there's always...
Stop them from going around, because if I'm going to make a 3-point turn, an 18-wheel, and I can go around the building, I'm just going to go around the building.
Yeah, until you get around it, and you see how difficult it can be to get all the way around. I agree. But there will be someone there to receive the trucks. They generally want someone handing them a check at the time that they are making their delivery. So someone will be there. Someone will be there to direct. Someone will be there to direct them back either into the barn or back into the material area, which will allow them to shut off their backup alarms. In any event, all deliveries would be between the hours of 9 and 3, so during daytime, weekday daytime in any event.
Could you, if you don't have it tonight, can you just find out what the frequency of the diesel deliveries would be?
Once a month.
Once a month. So, just along the line of what we're talking about here, would it be possible to put a gate there to prevent the tractor trailers from going around? Could you unlock for the diesel truck when it comes in if it's so infrequent?
We have never actually used that. Previously, trucks have never gone back there. We had only proposed that to reduce the noise, but that has not ever been accessed previously. So I don't anticipate it.
Where would you
I prefer to do a planting coming across, just to reduce the footprint of the opening to 8 feet in. Just like we had that previous with some privet, so our little gator could go through.
You're just fueling your landscape equipment.
Correct.
So the bigger trucks would be dissuaded from going there because it's such a tight.
Correct. And we could do it on both sides if you felt like that would be appropriate.
You just, the guy comes in in a truck, you ain't watching him, he's gonna go where he thinks it's
we're just
easy.
trying to
Right.
Okay, thanks.
There is a requirement that loading areas are not supposed to be within 30 feet of the lot line.
Well, there are none. This is the closest point, 37 feet.
37?
Yeah.
But if your truck is
Truck
in the,
stops. It doesn't pull in here to unload. The truck actually stops here. There's a hose that comes in the door, entry to where the,
and where do the vehicles get fueled?
they pull up here. And the hoses run out through the door here. The door, the opening to the shed is on the end of the shed, not, this is enclosed on that side. So all of the fueling happens in this area.
We have a question.
Oh, are the trucks?
Why don't you come on up and introduce yourself to the viewing audience?
I am Pamela Flooring, 44 Forest Street. So the trucks every day will be going there to fuel? I have other issues, obviously, but how many? So all the trucks are going to be going there and idling and
No,
being fueled
no.
daily?
As needed,
How
a couple
often?
of times a week, each of their trucks will be fueled at this location. They won't be idling.
Bobcats and the trucks, all of you?
Yeah, everything that takes diesel, most of their equipment takes
So there'll be a
diesel.
lot of activity there.
No different.
No, there will be occasional end of day, middle of day, pull in, fuel the truck, pull out. Truck will be turned off. It won't be idling while it's being run. You never idle trucks vehicles when they're being fueled. You turn them off. They'll be turned off here, and away they go.
And how many trucks do they
They
have?
have a total of 17 pieces of equipment
So that's 17 pieces of equipment.
They're all diesel?
occasionally. Yeah. During the day. And those operations, the fueling operations, will continue to happen regardless of whether permit would be done because of all the nursery activity that takes place. It's where they store the vehicles. It's where they fuel their vehicles. But this is a safe, quiet location it can be buffered, and I think, as suggested, some additional plantings in here will further quiet the operation.
Well, you raise an interesting point. You've got a nursery special permit dated 67. Is that when it was, has it been renewed?
67 renewed and 87.
Right, okay. So that is the permit for the nursery, which permits a number of things. And then there is, in the application, there is a fair amount of talk about a agricultural use that is exempt from zoning under the Dover Amendment, which would be, the Dover Amendment is 40A, General Laws, Chapter 40A, Section 3, which says that an area used primarily for growing berries and a number of other things can be exempt from certain zoning requirements. But I guess the question is, which areas are primarily used in this way, and are they used for anything else but the agricultural use? Because there has been talk that part of this operation is exempt under the Dover Amendment, and we want to know what part that is.
I have a question that's relative to what you're saying.
Okay, good.
I do as
Knowing
well.
that you understand the Dover Amendment very well, is it talk about stuff that's grown on the land? I mean, is that the intent, that something that's farmed on land, grown on land?
You know.
My question leads to the fact that it seems to me that a lot of the stuff on here is just brought in and plopped and planted and then plucked out and sold. It isn't actually grown there.
Yeah, well,
It isn't seeded and grown there.
I think that this is a question. If they're saying that this is an exempt agricultural use, then we should know that, because
Point being, you're not growing any
their
agriculture.
their point of view is important. It doesn't necessarily mean it's correct.
I think that...
Wait, we've got another question before
Can I
you
throw
comment.
some complexity, some more complexity into this? So we have Section 2 and Section 3 in here. Section 2 of the zoning is definition of landscaping business and permissible activities. And Section 3 describes the other businesses that are on the site that exist with it, which would cover the nursery business and cover the agricultural business. But Section 2, which is you've responded to on page 3 of your application, you've listed landscaping services and snow management services. But you don't list firewood, Christmas trees and materials, and snow plowing under Section 2. And under the zoning, those three are allowed in this permit. Now, you have them under Section 3, and I think at least firewood, definitely Christmas materials and maybe firewood are also allowed under the nursery. I can't remember on the firewood. So my question to you in this, and it's a question I had earlier, which activities are you actually applying for under the special permit? And which ones are going to be under the special permit for the ZBA for the nursery? And to Alex's and Mike's point, which ones are under the agricultural exemption? Because I think we need to clarify that for the purposes of discussing the special permit.
So, see if I can help answer. So there is a debate, if you will, has reached the courts over what is and what isn't agricultural and what's allowed. And as I have my conversations, the court will decide that someday, and life will go on one way or the other. And what all of that entails will be determined. What I know is that certain of the operations that were conducted are no longer allowed to be conducted on the property.
Right.
And perhaps we need to shift a little bit the locations of some of the descriptions with respect to the application of zoning, but as I read the zoning, as I understand it, or at least as I understand what they're allowed to do, they can operate a nursery. They can sell mulches and other materials in smaller quantities, so retail. They may not receive and deliver for installation elsewhere from this location. So large volumes of mulches, stone, et cetera, need to be delivered elsewhere today if they're going to receive it, deliver. That is primarily, number one, what we're trying to get permission to do.
Right.
Two, deals with the firewood, because firewood is allowed to be sold today in smaller quantities. And so larger quantities are received in Canton, are trucked over, stored in the barn, and are available for people to bring their pickups, their station wagons, buy them in small bundles. So the receipt and the delivery side of the firewood business was another thing that we seek to restore from the location.
So then that needs to be added to section 2 definition.
Flip that, at least add it, or flip it over from 3.
And then that brings, well, flip it over from 3 is fine, but it needs to be in there, but, you know, we
Don,
need to
would you
know.
wait a minute, I see that you're
Yeah.
going to add to our edification, hopefully,
And then
rather
that
than
brings,
confusion.
yeah, and that brings up then a question, if you are allowing a certain quantity of firewood sales under nursery and a certain quantity of, or level of firewood sales under the special permit, how does somebody coming in, looking at that, know which is being sold where, and does it make more sense to have all of the firewood sales under this and none of it under the nursery? The same would be true of some of the mulch sales that are currently being allowed under the nursery. If there's a level that's allowed under nursery and a higher level that's allowed under the special permit, does it make sense to move all of those under the special permit?
In my mind, the ability to receive, sell, deliver the full volumes of each of the items that are delivered to the site, the town ought to have better understanding and control over that. They ought to be incorporated into a single permit. That would be, now, my client may shoot me for saying it, but I just think that from a simplification perspective, if there is a permit that's going to be granted that is going to allow those things to happen, then that ought to be incorporated into the single permit. It's easier to control, it's easier to understand, it's easier to deal with, it's easier for the owner to deal with. All of the materials that they receive, they sell, they deliver, it's all under one permit, firewood, mulch, et cetera. Except for materials that they receive and spread on the site as part of how they care for the materials in the nursery. So assuming that a special permit gets granted, it makes sense to do it. If for some reason special permit were not to be granted, then they would essentially continue status quo, which is selling smaller quantities at retail. They just wouldn't be able to receive the larger items. So I think from that, it makes sense in that big picture to simply have the permit apply to all of the activities that relate to sort of the landscaping stuff, which is materials that they receive, deliver, install elsewhere.
So then I'm going to ask you for 2 and 3 to rewrite them. So 2 is only the stuff that would be authorized by the special permit, and 3 is only the stuff that exists underneath other authorizations, the nursery and the agricultural, which I think hits to what you were saying as well, so that we don't see an overlap of mulch is allowed here, mulch is allowed there, and firewood's allowed here, and firewood's allowed there.
When we drew up this zoning, I remember specifically saying that we don't want people saying, oh, well, we were doing that for the nursery. Oh, well, that was a landscaping. Oh, well, that's our agricultural berry operation. we suggested that if you want a special permit to do these things, all your operations are going to be controlled by the special permit so that there can be proper monitoring. Because if people are able to say, no, that wasn't landscape, then we would be in the position which I don't want to be in, which I sort of think the Board of Appeals may be in now, that it just is a nightmare to enforce. And we did make this clear when we did the zoning. And I think that it's undoubtedly the case that if we were to issue a permit, that we would not allow this bifurcation. We would say, if you want the permit.
I'm going to be in partial agreement with you.
All right, you're going to be what?
In partial agreement with you. In partial, not in. I am.
All right, well.
I agree with part of what you're saying. How does that sound? The caveat is Section 2 is only the stuff that's allowed under Section 2 of the zoning. So that is the landscaping business. It is the firewood, the Christmas trees and other holiday materials, the snow plowing,
And
the
wood.
materials that, I said firewood, and the materials that are related to the landscaping. So this Section 2 is what needs to be in your Section 2. All of the stuff that's in that Section 2 should not be in Section 3.
Then the limits are set by the 2012 limits.
Exactly.
And you don't want them to come in and say, well, that's the 2012 limits, but I'll reiterate some of the same points, but this is the nursery stuff. That's why there's more than
yes.
in that limit.
Yes.
I understand your point.
It says 30 yards in 2012, there's
Yeah.
40 because that's.
Where is the dispute?
The dispute is, I think you were saying all activities should
Oh,
be
no,
governed.
I
There's
just
still the
meant
nursery.
landscape.
Yes, okay,
Yeah.
okay, that's what I wanted to clarify, because the nursery and the,
All the
possibly the agricultural is
No,
separate, so, yeah.
So I,
If we know what they are.
I hear you. I will work on a
Yeah.
redraft. And as you refer that, there is a, I didn't mention it earlier, but the snow and ice activity, they have plowed this winter. You certainly would have wanted them plowing. Every available plow is a good thing. But they have two plows. They use on two of their trucks, and they help the municipality. They do private plowing. They do it, stage it from inside the barn. It's quiet. It's only during snow and ice emergencies, but it is part of the activity that they want to continue to do.
Okay, now, Mr. Dunn, do you have a question that you think can't wait?
I just wanted to add, because I know that this.
Well, come on up, introduce yourself, and
Matthew Dunn, I represent Mr. Joe Enning and Mr. Rowe, and I just wanted to, it seems like you guys have already addressed the Dover Amendment issue, but the activities that would need a special permit, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Corcoran at all, but in my head, the activities that would need a special permit are the ones that were precluded by the ZBA in the September 26th decision. And I say that because the issue was before the Superior Court on two occasions. Once before Judge Davis, once before Judge Wilson. And they upheld the ZBA decision and precluded the uses that the ZBA prohibited on the site. So that wouldn't have occurred if those uses were exempt by the Dover Amendment. Are you following me here?
Mm-hmm.
Because they wouldn't have needed the special permit, or the Judge Davis or Judge Wilson wouldn't have issued the injunctive order, because those uses would have been exempt.
well, we've asked for a specification of the uses that they believe are Dover Amendment uses, and that should be helpful. As far as the court may have prohibited things, if the zoning allows it and they apply for it, then we are in a position of granting a special permit for the activity, if the zoning permits.
No, I understand that, and that's what I'm just saying is that some uses aren't there, are potentially covered by the Dover Amendment, which they wouldn't need a special permit, even under the zoning bylaw that they're now applying for. But the uses that would need a special permit under the zoning bylaw that they're applying for are those uses that were prohibited or prescribed by the ZBA back in September 26th,
And I say that because those decisions were challenged with the Dover Amendment argument in the Superior Court, and the court found that the Dover Amendment was not applicable to those uses. That's all.
Okay, now, back to you, Mr. Corcoran. I guess we're in the question phase. Yes.
Page 8, hours. Your page 8, so it's coming under F, operations, and then you've got the title, hours of operations for landscape business use on 7, page 8, and you've got Monday through Saturday, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. So under the zoning, which is 4R, those hours, the 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Saturday, is the sales office hours, so that should be clarified. And then the next thing is you've got provided that the use of equipment, including bobcats for loading and unloading planted materials, may occur. And you have Monday through Friday, 7 to 6, Saturday, 8 to 5, and Sunday, 10 to 3. If you look at 7E, where you have on-site traffic and loading deliveries, it says such loading and use of noisy equipment may only occur between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, and the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on Saturday, unless an earlier start of no more than 1 hour is shown to be reasonably necessary for the operations of the landscaping business. So if you're allowing that extra hour, we need to talk about, you need to show that it's reasonably necessary. Then you have loading on Sunday from 10 to 3, but if the zoning says there shall be no loading or use of noisy equipment on Sundays, provided that the use of equipment for loading of plant and nursery materials which are not sold as part of landscaping services shall be permissible between the hours of 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. So you can load for nursery, but not for landscaping, and that needs to be clarified in here. And I think verbally you'd said that deliveries were, it was a different time you'd given. I think you'd said 10 to 3, and then just to clarify, you do have it correct in the application of 9 to 2 on Monday through Friday.
I think I said 10 to 2.
Or 10 to 2, I can't remember which one it
10
was.
to 2 is for the handling of dumpster.
Okay, that might have been it. I couldn't remember what
And
you
that's
said,
consistent, I
so.
think, with the zoning, and the other deliveries are 9 to 2 or 9 to 3.
9 to 2.
And that's
yeah.
consistent with
That
the
is
zoning.
consistent with the zoning. So just have a look at, make sure that you clarify the sales office hours versus the loading hours, and make sure that the loading hours are consistent with Section 7E of the zoning.
I thought we were correct, but I will double check that.
Okay, great.
The 1967 permit says as follows. Number 1, no parking whatsoever shall take place on Hillside Street by automobiles of customers or by automobiles or trucks used by applicant in connection with the greenhouse. Applicant shall provide a parking area which shall have a capacity more than sufficient to take care of any parking by customers. And you are talking about use of Hillside Street and Forest Street for parking. It would seem to me that that's not on the table, and that there has to be, if you're going to have big events, that's fine. But you've got to be respectful of the neighbors, and you've got to provide parking for them. Either that, or you've got to go to the Board of Appeals and tell them that you want them to allow parking on Hillside Street and Forest Street. And
I think it is a practice that has grown over time since the 1967 permit was put in place, and it is a very occasional, special purpose type of event, and they do cooperate with the Milton Police. We'll take to provide details to manage parking. We will take a second look at that with respect to how we would entertain parking under those very limited uses, which are not related to the landscaping uses, but they are related to other uses on the site.
a number of people who don't have sufficient parking, use buses for events from a,
Assuming that there's a reasonably convenient location to bus to and
Well,
from.
You have that separate location on Hillside, don't you? You can park
They can
cars
park
there.
over there.
I mean, you can walk from the,
You can park and walk from there.
out of these events, it seems to be outside and walking.
That's not, that's reasonable to consider.
And just again on hours, when you're looking at that, page 19 and 20, pages 19 and 20 also refers to hours, so just make sure they're all consistent. And 21.
okay, these questions don't have to be exclusive. We know that where you are and you're going to be available as questions may arise. But let's open the meeting up to, the hearing up to hear from people who would like to be heard. On a matter pertinent to this application. Yes, sir.
I think this may be the appropriate time. My name is Dr. Martin Dunn. I live with my wife Carol at 50 Briarbrook Street. Our land extends from Parkwood Drive, Briarbrook Street, and Barbary Lane. We built our home here 45 years ago, and several years later, added a barn for 2 horses and a dog. We have been the only family in our home, and presently, we are one of the 3 original families who have lived in this neighborhood since it was developed in the late 1970s. With the exception of one meeting, when there was a bad snowstorm, and I thought the meeting would be canceled, it was not. I've attended all of the meetings before several different committees during the past 2 years relevant to Thayer Nursery. I have lost count of the exact number. I do not intend to speak tonight on the legal issues of this permit because I do not feel qualified to do so. I will leave that to Attorney Dunn, no relation, and Attorney Corcoran. However, based upon my experience as the team leader of 60 medical missions to developing countries, where I followed my patients in their shantytown homes before and after surgery, I feel very qualified to speak about strong odors and loud noises, which were present for 24 hours, 7 days a week. Thankfully, we have neither in our neighborhood. My relationship with the Oldfield family has existed for many years. I remember Bob Oldfield, father of Maggie and Josh, who grew up with my oldest daughter, Tracy, serving many years on the school committee in Milton. More than once, he served as chairman of that committee and always acted in the best interests of our children. He was a member of the Conservation Committee and for many years, a town meeting member elected by the residents of this neighborhood. Maggie and Josh have continued his legacy for children by having Easter egg hunts, doll carriage, and bicycle parades, a putting green, etc. on their property. We are so fortunate to live in an area known as horse country. One is only to walk to the beginning of Parkwood Drive and look across Hillside Street to the large white barn with corrals outside that stable several horses. Just 3 houses down toward Randolph Ave, there is a similar-sized boarding stable with corrals out front bordering Hillside Street. 18-wheelers were always delivering hay and feed to these stables. Did this ever bother me? Right at the end of my street? Of course not. We were privileged to live in horse country. On any given day, depending upon the direction that the wind was blowing, were there any odors? Of course there were. Horses from the stables on Hillside Street were always walked either with or without mounted riders in front of our home. When the snow clears, I can assure you that every single day, horses with riders on will walk along Hillside Street, up Forest Street, to enter the trails up in the Blue Hills, and then they will return afterwards. Lisa Curtis, daughter of the original owners of 23 Parkwood Drive, constantly rode a pony around the neighborhood and stopped to allow children to pat the pony. For our family, it was wonderful to be in horse country. So wonderful, in fact, that with the blessing and approval of all of our abutting neighbors, we built a 2-stall barn on our property, not only so that our daughters could ride, but also so that they could develop the discipline of caring for animals. Dixie and El Cid, our 2 horses, were the neighborhood pets. Not a day passed that the children in the neighborhood did not show up to give the horses an apple or a carrot through the corral fence. Never once did we ever have a complaint from a neighbor about an odor or 18-wheelers delivering hay or feed. Parenthetically, it is of interest to note that once our daughters finished riding, we donated El Cid to the then MDC police in the Blue Hills and Dixie to a farm for special needs children. El Cid received extensive media coverage when he went into Houghton's Pond and allowed his MDC police officer to jump off his back and save a little girl from drowning. El Cid, an alumnus of this neighborhood, we were so proud. I remember one of our neighbors loading up his large golf-type vehicle with children, probably his grandchildren, and riding around the neighborhood. Halloween was a special event when a large hay wagon pulled by a tractor would let the children get off and in their costumes go up to each door for trick-or-treat. I remember Ron Lucio, who would hitch up his horse to a cart or sleigh, depending on the weather, and occasionally with other people on board, would leave his home and barn where he and his wife Pam lived, drive down Forest Street, turn right on Hillside Street, and enter Parkwood Drive, proceed around the entire neighborhood, and then back to his barn. Both the children and adults loved to see him come, for we were in horse country. Did we ever have noise in the neighborhood? Of course we did. The home, which for many years directly abutted our property and was literally adjacent to our backyard, had an active tennis court. The home across the street had a tennis court and basketball court with lights on it, which during the spring, summer, and fall was very active at night. Did this affect our lives? Of course not. We lived in a wonderful neighborhood, and we were all friends. It was great to hear the children, and in many instances, their parents enjoying themselves. I cannot tell you how many times on Saturday and occasionally on Sunday at 7 a.m., I was awakened by the noise of a power lawnmower from any one of the landscapers mowing lawns in our area. Did it bother me? Of course not. The landscapers needed to begin work at that time, especially if there had been rain earlier in the week, in order to make a living and keep our neighborhood beautiful. It is a strong recommendation from my wife, Carol, and me that their nursery be granted a permit by this committee. We urge the committee to establish reasonable guidelines and monitor them with unaccompanied visits or unannounced visits, whether it be by the building commissioner or a similar person appointed by the appropriate town of Milton committee. It should not be monitored by self-appointed policing members of the neighborhood. But this reminds me of 2 experiences that I've had in my life, which I would never want to see, not only in Milton, but the United States. I remember going through Checkpoint Charlie at the Berlin Wall with my wife and daughter. After passing into Communist East Berlin and with guards on top of the wall with machine guns and taking pictures, we were ordered to get off the bus and leave everything behind except our passports, which would be individually checked outside by the communist guards. They also entered the bus. They went through everything that we left behind. Then they wheeled large mirrors with long handles on them beneath the bus to see if there was anything attached to it. The second incident happened in Cuba several years ago when I was attending a meeting of surgeons. I wanted to share with a Cuban colleague a surgical technique that I was using. We were to meet in the lobby of a hotel. I arrived first and selected a table. When my colleague arrived, he motioned me to another table in the middle of the room. He then told me that the table which I had selected was close to a plant, which he said was probably bugged. These types of activity we do not want. Establish penalties, and if THEA does not follow them, then the committee should enforce the penalties. In granting the permit and establishing the guidelines with appropriate penalties when indicated, this neighborhood will once again flourish with unity. This is what my wife and I want for our daughters. Thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts with you.
Thank you. Okay. Who wants to be heard on this application? Mr. Dunn.
Again, my name is Matthew Dunn. I'm an attorney. I represent Philip Joenning and John Rowe. No relation to Dr. Dunn. And I can attest that he has been into every meeting I've been to anyways, which is a lot. There are a few preliminary matters that I'd just like to talk about before we get going here. It's my understanding that that the application before the board is a new application submitted by THEA. Just from a procedural standpoint, I'm just kind of curious because there is some implications with the fact that there is another application that's out there, if that has been formally withdrawn. Does anyone know that?
I believe it has been revised, but Mr. Corcoran can answer that.
I don't know that it's been formally withdrawn. I will check that tomorrow. If it's not, I will formally withdraw it so that certainly we should.
As I understand it, the application was filed, it was revised a few times, and then most recently
A new application.
a new final revised application, but it isn't as though, I mean, it's still a hearing on the original application as revised. In other words, the original application is still, they filed an original application, they paid the fee for the original application. This, yes.
We started a new public hearing.
Yeah.
We have a new application. What are the time limits? Are they based on the new application or the old application?
Well, that's sort of what I'm getting at. Under Section 9 of 40A, I think it's 90 days from the date of the first public hearing that the decision is due. And just to go chronologically through where we are, I believe the original application was filed on October 21st of 2014. And I haven't done the math, but as just reviewing that section of the Zoning Act, I think we're pretty close, or if not exceeded. That's why I was asking.
We did start the hearing on that application timely.
Right.
And then eventually the hearing was canceled, and perhaps that has triggered the decision requirement. The fact of, you should consider how you are going to remove this as a potential problem by tomorrow.
I will. I understand the issue. What I had understood, I'll clarify it tomorrow, is that this was a new application.
But if
So it
the
starts the
last,
clock
if
talking-
the last
ticking down.
application were still
Yeah.
around.
There's a potential that could be
Then
constructively
there's a potential
approved.
that the canceled hearing ended the hearing, which it did,
Right.
and that the time for decision is therefore running.
For the convenience of the board and certainly for Mr. Dunn, it is, I want to make sure that there is a proper consideration of the application. The application date ought to be March 11th or whatever the date that was received for this application. I treated it as a new application. We took a combination of materials that were submitted and supplemented. We honed them into what I think is a single application. So I think the dates, we have time. I'm not suggesting that. So we're no longer considering what was originally filed. We're considering what is presently
Right.
before you.
What's in the most recent application, but you're going to write a letter.
I will write a
And
letter.
it's going to, and you're going to review it, and I'm going to review it, and we're going to be satisfied that we're not going to run into problems.
So along those lines, if it's a new application, and I don't mean to get hyper-technical here, I had previously submitted a memorandum to the board that I'd asked be included in the present case file for the new application that was submitted on January 8th of 2015.
Is it January 7th?
January 7th, yeah.
Right.
So
I think that,
I have no objection to
so
that being.
we will, Tim, if you can distribute, maybe I'll give this to you for copying.
I think everyone has a copy.
We all
of
have a
this.
copy.
think-
This
yeah.
is the January 7th one,
This is the January 7th one, okay.
and just distribute it tomorrow.
Double check it that way.
Yeah.
do you want me to redate it? I just put my initials next to it
You
or
want
something?
to redate it the 8th?
Do you want to review
No,
it?
redate
given-
it as is today, so to clarify that it's part of this application. Doesn't matter to me, I mean, this is all being
No,
recorded.
that's fine.
so
It doesn't, the date on it is fine. You're submitting it now, and that's
Okay.
fine.
Just one question. I don't know if anything in the new application changes what you wrote before.
It doesn't.
as far-
It
Okay, you've
doesn't.
had a chance to have a
Yeah,
look
I
at it
did.
then. Okay, good.
Briefly, yep,
Yep.
but I did. So just to bring everybody up to speed on where we are, because I think some people are new to this stage of where we're at. Again, the original application was submitted on October 21st of 2014. The planning board did a preliminary assessment of the application on November 6th of 2014. The planning board members, Mr. Corcoran and myself, my clients in the Oldfields, Josh and Maggie, did a site inspection on Saturday. I believe it was November 15th, 2014.
Excuse me, Mr. Dunn, but this is one reason why I like to say that it's a revised application, so that our site visit, which is not part of the hearing, can be.
Just to be very brief here, because it leads into where I'm going with this new application. An original hearing, the hearing on the original application was on January 8th of 2015. There was some additional information that was submitted by FAIR in response to the board's suggestions on November 6th of 2014. Additional information was presented by FAIR on February 12th, which was the next hearing, on its original application. As Mr. Whiteside has indicated, the March 4th, 2015 meeting was canceled, and here we are on March 25th with still additional information being submitted to the board. So, and I'll get into this a little bit, and I did get into it in my memo, but it's very difficult to follow, at least for me, what is being proposed, how FAIR proposes to meet all the requirements that are very specific, and there's a strict provision in the bylaw amendment that requires Thayer to meet every single one of the requirements of the bylaw. So, again, like I said, I'll get into this a little bit more in depth, but there's been 5 hearings here with 5 submissions, and it's difficult to follow, and that's my only point here. But sort of a larger issue here, and I know that there's a desire to sort of go by this issue at 100 miles an hour because we're so far down the road here. But it's very important, and it's going to be important should there be any later proceeding. And that deals with the fact that whether the applicant can seek the zoning relief that the applicant is seeking here. Just keeping in mind that neither myself or my clients had any say in the wording of the 1967 special permit. They had no say in the wording of the 1987 special permit. They had little, if any, say in the language that was used in the bylaw amendment itself. And all those things govern who can apply or who has standing to apply for the special permit that Thayer Nursery Corporation is seeking here. So if you look at the situation twofold, first I'm going to read you the requirements of the bylaw amendment because it's really broken into 2 parts as to who is eligible. The first part states, in a residence zone on a lot or lots on which a landscaping business was being conducted in July of 2012, the planning board may grant a special permit for landscaping business on such lot or lots, provided that the applicant or applicants or their predecessor in interest on that date held a special permit or use variance issued by the Board of Appeals pursuant to Section 3A4 or 6 with regards to all or part of any such lot. Now, that's really a 2-part requirement. The first part has to deal with what was actually happening on the property that they seek a landscaping or they seek a special permit under the bylaw amendment in 2012. And that is, there has to be conducting a landscaping business, I suppose, as that term is defined in the bylaw. And that's not really in dispute. The portion that is in dispute is the second part of the requirement, and that is, and both have to be met, provided that the applicant or their predecessor in interest held a special permit on that date. And that's where I'm going to start off with regards to my memo. And again, the bylaw amendment states in paragraph 8 that the planning board can only grant a special permit where all conditions are met. And that provision that I just read is a condition of granting a special permit. As a prerequisite to apply for a special permit, the bylaw amendment requires, and as I just stated, that you have to be operating a landscaping business, and I'm paraphrasing here, in July of 2012, and the applicant either has to hold a special permit, which I think everyone in agreement in the room can concede that Thayer Nursery Corporation did not hold a special permit to conduct a landscaping business in 2012, or their predecessor in interest. And that's really the point that I'm going to drill down here on. In the application, the Oldfield Family LLC indicates that it is the owners of the properties 217, 237, 270 Hillside Street, and 0 and 24 Forest Street. And Thayer Nursery states that it operates there as a tenant. Thayer Nursery further states that in 1967, the Oldfields, i.e. Robert and Margaret Oldfield, were granted a special permit by the Milton Zoning Board of Appeals, and that in 1987, the special permit was amended by the bylaws so as to allow Lot 1B to be used in conjunction with the nursery. Thayer Nursery claims that from 1963 to the present, the Oldfield family has resided on the property, has held an ownership of Thayer Nursery Corporation, and has operated continuously as a nursery agribusiness. The ownership part of the property and Thayer's sort of succession and interest to the interest in the property as opposed to the interest in the permit is not in dispute either. Attorney Corcoran has provided deeds and leases that show that Margaret Oldfield and her husband, the Oldfield family, the Oldfield LLC and Josh Oldfield own the property, and that they, under various leases, leased the property to Thayer Nursery. So Thayer Nursery on the property as a tenant is not in dispute. What's in dispute, again, is Thayer Nursery's rights, and this is separate from the property, whether they're allowed to undertake the uses that were bestowed upon Robert Oldfield and Margaret Oldfield in the special permit in 1967 as amended in 1987. Again, the applicants do not argue that the Oldfield Family LLC or Thayer Nursery Corporation held a special permit or use variance issued by the Board of Appeals in July of 2012. Rather, they imply that they are successors in interest to the rights bestowed by the Milton ZBA in 1967 and 1987 special permits to the Oldfield family. However, the express terms of the 1967 special permit, as amended by the 1987 special permit, specifically limit who can hold those rights. And again, if you have a copy of my memo, both the 1967 and 1987 special permits are attached, as is the copy of the bylaw amendment that's at issue here. In paragraph 10 of the 1967 special permit, the ZBA stated, "This permit runs to you, i.e. Robert and Margaret Oldfield, who were the applicants, personally, including any assistance only, and shall not be assigned or transferred to any other person." While the 1987 special permit amended paragraph number 10 of the 1967 special permit, it too restricted the assignment and transfer of the rights granted to the ZBA by the ZBA. In paragraph number 4, which is paragraph number 4 of the 1987 special permit, the ZBA stated, paragraph 10 of the conditions, limitations, and safeguard is amended to read, "This permit runs to the applicant, i.e. Robert and Margaret Oldfield, and their children personally, including any assistance only, and shall not be assigned or transferred to any other person. Such conditions and limits in limiting a special permit to use by the applicant or their children are recognized as valid in Massachusetts." As the plain language provided in both the 1967 and 1987 special permits makes clear, only Robert Oldfield, Margaret Oldfield, and their children can personally hold the rights in the special permit bestowed by the ZBA. As it's stated and implied in both permits, that the intent of this limitation was to keep the business grant the special permit in the residential district and keep it to a minimal level. Those rights, the rights from the 1967 and 87 special permits, cannot be assigned or transferred to anyone else. And they said it, the ZBA said it not once but twice, including the Oldfield Family LLC and Thayer Nursery Corporation. Accordingly, by the very terms of the 1967 and 1987 special permits, the applicants cannot be a successor in interest because those rights cannot be assigned or transferred to them. Stated differently, the Oldfield Family LLC and Thayer Nursery Corporation are not Robert Oldfield, Margaret Oldfield, or their children. They are legally distinct entities. And there's two cases that are on point. First is this Spanus case, that's cited, stating that a corporation is an independent legal entity separate and distinct from its shareholders, officers, and employees. More significantly is the next case that's cited, which is the New England Pro Tour case, which states or holds for the proposition that a corporation, even a corporation wholly owned by a single person, is a distinct and separate legal entity. The applicants cannot possess the same rights as Robert Oldfield, Margaret Oldfield, and their children because the 1987 and 1967 special permits expressly prohibit it. It is axiomatic that one cannot be a successor in interest if the interest that they claim cannot be validly assigned or transferred to them by the person who they claim to be their predecessor in interest. In this case, the applicants cannot be a successor in interest to the Oldfield family members' rights in the 1967 and 1987 special permits because the very terms of those decisions expressly state that there can be no valid assignment or transfer of those rights to anyone else, including the applicants. Consequently, Thayer Nursery Corporation and the Oldfield family were simply operating the commercial ventures on the property in July of 2012 without any legal right to do so. They cannot point to any legally recognizable predecessor in interest that held a special permit use variance issued by the Board of Appeals in July of 2012. This is an eligibility prerequisite under the bylaw amendment, and as their nursery in the Oldfield family cannot satisfy it, they are ineligible for the zoning relief that they seek. Their nursery is a successor in interest only to the property rights of the Oldfield family. They are not a successor to its use rights as provided for in the 1967 and 1987 special permits. So I think that that's a major issue for this board to address. I'm curious, and I read Attorney Corcoran's response, but the predecessor in interest, how Thayer gets around their nursery corporation and the Oldfield Family LLC, get along the requirements of the bylaw amendment that they sponsored. I don't know how they do it with the fact that there's these two requirements, both need to be met as a prerequisite, and they only satisfy one of them.
If you had your book, which you should have gotten a book, but in any event, the application for approval of the special permit, it's interesting. They say owner, Oldfield Family LLC, applicant, Maggie Oldfield and Josh Oldfield, and then company, Thayer Nursery.
But on the second page, especially if...
I understand. This is the first page.
Okay.
And on the second page, it says application, and then it says name, Oldfield Family LLC and Thayer Nursery Corp.
So
whether that's, I'm just pointing out that the first page says the applicants are Maggie and Josh Oldfield.
And if I can address, I'll address that.
Okay.
To the extent that the applicants may argue that Margaret Oldfield and F. Joshua Oldfield are the applicants for the special permit currently sought by this board, they too lack standing to pursue such zoning relief. Neither own the property. The Oldfield Family LLC does, and they rent it to Thayer Nursery Corporation. Moreover, neither Maggie nor Josh will be a party operating the commercial ventures for which the special permit is sought and needed. Thayer Nursery Corporation will be the one engaging in those activities. As such, neither Maggie nor Josh are parties in interest to the present zoning relief they seek. Accordingly, they are not eligible applicants under the bylaw amendment.
Well, this is, it may have been it may be an omission, but I don't see, where in the bylaw are the proper applicants listed? The people who can, or is it a matter of just state law that in order to be an applicant, but in order to be an applicant, you have to have an interest usually, and they have
no interest.
They have an interest in
corporation.
that they own the corporations.
Who else owns the corporation?
No.
Neither do I. I know that it's not. I know that the corporation is not the Oldfield family. I know that that's a legally distinct entity.
Well, what I'm saying is this: that you raise an issue, and I don't have any definitive answer, and maybe, Brian, we should seek Mr. Flynn's advice on this. But we will determine that tomorrow.
It's difficult. It's difficult. Not only are we doing this, on 5 different occasions where the goalposts are moving for anybody who opposes this. Now we don't even know who the applicant is. So, I mean...
Well, on the application, it's listed as Josh and Maggie, and on the second page, there is a possibly ambiguous reference to, it says application, landscape business use, date, and then it has name.
Well, it says applicant, Thayer Nursery Corporation. That's what it says.
Oh, in the right.
The application page, do you have this?
Yeah, yeah, I know
Just
that,
making
yeah.
sure.
Okay,
But that's the old one,
Look,
that's the
I
old
don't,
one,
look, there are, this is something that we will undoubtedly have to figure out. But if Maggie and Josh Oldfield were in fact the applicants, that would be one thing. And if their corporation, whether their predecessors in interest to the corporation, it seems to me that since the special permit for the nursery use runs to them, it would behoove them to be the applicants, because otherwise, if they say that, you know, because the special permit for the nursery says that they shall run the nursery.
I'm not trying to be overly contentious here. I'm just saying that it's extremely difficult for anybody opposing this application, which my clients, as you know, do, to meaningfully present an argument when they don't know who the applicant is, because it's going to frame your decision, who the applicant is. Because if it's Maggie and Josh, what's going to happen if the special permit is granted to them? Are they going to assign it to their nursery corporation? And can that even be done? Or is it their nursery corporation who can operate independently here? And so, I mean, this opens up something that is very confusing.
There are loose ends. No question about it. But we're not going to be able to tie those loose ends tonight.
Right, but how can we even proceed on the application if we don't know who the applicant is?
We can proceed on the basis that...
Who can proceed?
The board can proceed, because...
On what, though? On whose application?
I think we could certainly continue it to tomorrow night to allow the Oldfield family
That would be
to
great.
address the application, the issue of who is the applicant and what the ownership is. I think that's fair for them to have heard you tonight and then to come back and address it to us.
So you're suggesting this is a good time to continue?
I think it's a very, unless there's somebody else who wishes to speak.
One more question on
yeah.
on the specific issue.
Yeah.
So one question seems to be the applicant. Is there a second question here about the validity of whether or not there was a special permit in 2012?
Well, I don't think that there's any dispute that the 1967 and 1987 special permit, Maggie and Josh have rights in that special permit. It's stated there. Where we have a disconnect is whether Maggie and Josh can transfer, whether they're proceeding on their own or whether their nursery corporation is proceeding. Because if their nursery corporation is proceeding, then we're saying that they can't do that, right? I mean, because those rights cannot be assigned or transferred by the very terms of both those permits.
So as I understand, you said the fact that there was a landscaping business in 2012, not in dispute. We all agree that existed. We all agree that the property ownership transferred as it did to the current owners. No problem with that. The question is the standing based on the special permit.
If I may, just on that issue, the question is whether a predecessor in interest to the applicant, whether the applicant is Maggie and Josh, or whether it is a corporation that involves Maggie and Josh. Mm-hmm. The predecessor to that entity are Maggie and Josh. Maggie and Josh had rights under the permit, under the previous permits, or the permits that exist from 67 and 87. Whether or not those permits can be assigned is irrelevant. The question is whether a predecessor to this applicant had an interest in that permit. That's the ticket into the door. It isn't whether those permits could be assigned. It doesn't matter. This is a new permit. This is a permit for landscaping use that will be issued by this board. It's different from the permits that exist.
But if Maggie and Josh are running the nursery and the agricultural business, having a different entity doing the landscaping is, well, for one thing, it would seem to me that it would not be in accordance with the original special permit saying that they have to do it.
There's a separate issue.
Well, I understand that, but it's an issue that you've got to explain to us.
And it's an issue more broadly in terms of other questions that you raised tonight, vis-a-vis how does the entire site operate, under which permit, whether it's one permit, whether it's multiples. We will come back to you tomorrow with a...
I think that your suggestion Emily, that we entertain a motion to adjourn.
To continue,
Pam-
to continue.
All right, Pam, if you want to come up and be heard, that will be fine,
And then continue, not adjourn.
and then we will continue it.
Thank you, I appreciate it. My name is Pamela Poore, I live at 44 Forest Street. I had submitted a letter to the board prior to the meeting that was canceled, and I hope everyone got a chance to read it.
We're going to have to renew that letter because, as you know, it's a new proceeding that we're in.
Right, okay.
You sent out that letter, however, today.
I got it today.
I thought I
They
seen
just-
it previously by email.
All right, let's,
Now, if you want.
Can I resubmit it now, then?
I have it through February 20th, yeah.
okay, the February 20th letter will
Okay.
become part of the record here.
Okay. Did anyone get a chance to read it? No.
I read it.
Oh, you did,
But
okay.
it was a while ago.
Okay. Well, I'll highlight my major concerns with this application. First and foremost, relocating the commercial landscape business to my property line from the back of the property is not only unfair, it's absurd. Especially since the nursery has taken the steps to move the noise and odor away from other neighbors, they're basically moving it next to me. And I urge the board to have the land care yard located as far away from neighbors as possible. There are areas to the side of the front barn and next to the main entrance, and I think that would be more appropriate. The plan in the back proposes a 30-foot setback for the 10-foot fence, which is really going to be 12 feet above the line, with trees planted in between abutters and the fence. This should apply to all abutters. The 8-foot fence proposed on my side will be ineffective since I will get the 18-wheel trucks, it sounds like, just about every day, and the trucks are 12.5 feet high. And all the fencing should be no less than 12 feet in height, and again, no less than 30 feet from abutters. So I think what they've proposed in the back would only be fair to have next to me as well. So the fence would be 30 feet over with plantings in between. I have a problem with the seasonal farmers and artisan markets. When they held them before, I could hear voices and the music, and this is a residential neighborhood, and I don't feel they belong here. I enjoy and support the farmers market in Lower Mills, and if the Oldfields want to host one, they should find a public place to hold them. Again, I thought this application was for landscaping, not for retail shopping. And also under Section O, under the rules, it states if music is outdoors with a loudspeaker amplifier, they should seek approval. This should also be prohibited?
It is prohibited.
Okay, then they're asking for that? Okay. And I agree with you with this no Sunday landscaping services, so that was another issue I think you've addressed
It's
already.
loading, yeah.
Okay.
It's loading.
The lighting plan that shows the 22-foot-high light on the southern peak of the garden shop does affect me, and they're saying it's necessary for security, but they do have a security gate that they close every night, so that should be lowered as well. And I also ask that the nursery be required to replace bobcats and other noisy machinery with electric vehicles as they need to be replaced. And I do have concerns regarding enforcement of the special permit. Will there be fines for violations? And is there a point of revoking the permit if they persist? And I also urge the board to review the permit annually, given the history of violations in the past. My letter is a little more detailed, but I appreciate you letting me speak.
Thank you. We're going to be taking this up tomorrow, and perhaps we'll see you then.
Okay. At what time tomorrow, Alex?
We continued the other, the condo to 7 o'clock, I
The
believe.
condo, it's the same, Bill just told me to do 6:45 for the condo, 7 o'clock for there.
I think we
and
announced 7
We announced
o'clock, so we
7,
should, yeah, we did just announce it at 7
Okay,
o'clock.
okay.
So make it 7:15, I don't imagine, because I think Mary
We can
Ann's
do,
gonna-
let's make it 7:15.
I think
and
7:15 would make sense.
People would, if they have to listen to a little bit of condo zoning, that's probably good for them.
Yeah.
Thank you. Like I said, I've got all the fuel, I've got all the trucks, I have it all now, and they moved it from the back because of these issues, and I just don't think it's fair to have it next to me. Okay, thank you.
All right, now, yes, we are going to continue the hearing to tomorrow at
7:15.
7:15, and we will now vote on whether to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. We are now adjourned.